People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment.
I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different.
Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
You're an inspiration to us all.
Click that bit up.
Well, you are.
That's my ringtone. My political ambitions those days are gone, I can tell you.
She's only teasing. Go on.
He's probably going to want to lay down now. I'll give him 2 minutes to have one. Let's respectfully disagree. That's what we like on Jubes and Kerr. Come and join us. GB News, the People's Channel.
Michelle Dewberry, weekday evenings at 6 o'clock.
Start the day with GB News.
We catch up on all the big stories you didn't hear the night before.
And take a look at what the world's talking about this morning. That's right, Monday to Thursdays from 6 o'clock. It's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Straight after breakfast, join us, Bev Turner and Andrew Pearce. We're going to take you through till noon.
We'll be tackling the big topics of the day, including the things that the other channels just won't talk about. If it's happening here. Wake up to mornings on GB News, the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m.
What's the scoop?
I'll be joined by 2 of the country's top comedians.
That's right.
As we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight.
We're going to get into trouble.
If it's a big story, we'll be covering it.
Spill some tea on him.
There we go.
But we'll also have some fun.
I wouldn't stick up a bank.
My father didn't love me.
So anyway,
Headliners every night from 11 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
We've got a brand new lineup every Saturday night on GB News.
From 6 p.m, I'll give you my unique take on the world today.
Then at 7, it's me, Calvin Robinson, with my Common Sense Crusade.
New to GB News is the Saturday 5.
5 times the opinion. Join us every Saturday from 8 p.m. as we debate the week's stories.
With us 4, plus a special guest.
And at 9, of course, it's Mark Dolan Tonight. Brand new Saturday nights on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Welcome to GB News Live this Wednesday with me, Mark Longhurst, and coming up for you, of course, Prime Minister's Questions today, live from the House of Commons, the last session before the Easter recess, and it is going to be a little different, possibly a little more feisty, because Prime Minister Rishi Sunak and Sir Keir Starmer, the Labour leader, attending the funeral of the former Speaker, Baroness Betty Boothroyd, and these are the pictures to bring you from Cambridgeshire with that funeral about to take place. Just to reflect, of course, Baroness Betty Boothroyd, much loved. The first female speaker died last month at the age of 93. Sir Lindsay Hoyle, the current speaker, reflected one of a kind. And a former Tiller girl as well, who performed on the stage of the West End. And a much loved political and parliamentary figure. We have with us, joining us for PMQs today, Sally Ann Hart and also Graham Stringer. And Graham, you knew Betty Boothroyd quite well.
I did. She was the speaker when I first was elected. She was scary and formidable to a new MP. But
kept you in your place.
Everybody in their place. People didn't mess with Betty. But over the years, I got to know her, and there's another side of Betty when she was Speaker. As you say, she'd been on the stage, and she used to give really quite decent parties in the Speaker's apartments and invite friends from showbiz in. So there's a tough side to her as well as a fun side.
And smash that glass ceiling for female politicians in a big way.
The first and last, well, not
hopefully,
always last,
yeah.
but female, speaker. of the House of Commons.
And leaving a legacy too about behaving yourself perhaps in the Commons chamber, and we'll see whether that's going to carry on in a moment, because we might be getting quite a feisty session this time. Do you think Dominic Raab is looking forward to having an opponent who doesn't pull her punches, does she?
No, but I think he conducts himself very well and he's always polite. So I'm looking forward to seeing this sort of round of PMQs, as it is.
I mean, we say polite. We should reflect, of course, Graham, that he is still facing this inquiry into his alleged behaviour as a senior minister.
He is, and we'll have to wait for the result of that. I mean, he's got a contrast in styles with Angela Rayner, who's feisty and blunt and robust, and he's very measured, loyally in his responses. So it could be quite an interesting
So he's
session.
the boxer and she's the street fighter, perhaps.
Yeah, that's
right. Okay. Now let's obviously reflect too that after PMQs we are expecting this statement from Robert Jenrick, the immigration minister, on what we might see now. In terms of moving the asylum seekers from the hotels. I think the current bill is 6.8 million a day, and I assume some of those hotels in your own constituency, Hastings and Rye?
I just have one.
Right.
Yes, and obviously we have to keep an eye and make sure that the people who are in there are well looked after and provided with healthcare services. Yeah, but I have one.
What's been the reaction of the community? Because this is the other aspect, of course. In some areas, they have been critical, saying there's not enough of people to do in this area. There are not enough services, and particularly in isolated rural constituencies.
Yes, so we have one hotel in Hastings that's got a number, but it's not hundreds of asylum seekers there. So I think the number is definitely manageable. And I think we have to be very careful that we don't overload coastal communities, particularly with asylum seekers, because they've already face quite significant issues to start with.
Well, this is what the refugee charities say. And what about the cost? I mean, 6.8 million daily. We are likely to hear from Robert Jenrick about particularly 2 RAF bases probably going to be used, but also ferries and even barges. I mean, we've had this mooted before, haven't we?
Yes, and I think, you know, the cost is huge. 6.8 million a day to accommodate asylum seekers, illegal immigrants, whatever we want to call them. That's a phenomenal amount of money every day.
And I guess that's an open attack line for Angela Rayner today in terms of the government's handling of this.
I think the numbers involved show both a failure to administer the system as it is, but they also show that the system itself isn't, and I don't think can work.
This is the processing of the claims and the delay.
Yeah, I represent a lot of people who have made a claim for refugee status, and the time it takes to get a decision out of the Home Office is enormous. Often when a decision comes, if it's negative, the people have changed their circumstances. They've found a partner, they have children, so they start applying again. And so the situation goes on. Speed is the essence with determining these things, and I have to say the system is incredibly inefficient.
So what would Labour do in terms of the manning of the Home Office to actually get the claims through, or actually change the system itself?
Both, I would hope. Put the resources in to get the system working so that people are sent back if they have no legitimate claim for to be a refugee. And if they have, and they needed the protection of this country, then it should be determined very quickly and they should be settled into the community.
Yeah. The difficulties, obviously, we assume it might be Scampton and Weatherfield, the 2 RAF sites that are spoken of as housing some 3,000, perhaps, of these claimants. We've got some fairly senior Tories, Sir Edward Lee, for instance, former Tory minister, saying, not on my patch, people there don't want this.
Yes, and I think it goes for MPs across the party. A lot of people just don't want that number of people who are asylum seekers coming into their communities because of there's a lot of fear. It's to do with the services. You know, we've already got, particularly in some areas, particularly coastal communities, pressure on health and education to start with without more people coming in. And I think we've got to take that into account.
Well, let's head over to the chamber now. Deputy Speaker, of course, in the chair, Sir Lindsay Hoyle at that funeral. Let's cross to the Commons now.
We now come to questions to the Prime Minister, Sir Bill Wiggin.
Question number 1.
Well, Deputy Prime Minister.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I've been asked to reply on behalf of my right honourable friend, the Prime Minister, who is attending the funeral of Baroness Betty Boothroyd. I'm sure the whole House would want to join me in paying tribute to Baroness Boothroyd, the first female Speaker of the House, and our thoughts and prayers are with her family.
I'm sure the whole House does join in sending our thoughts and prayers about Baroness Boothroyd, whom we all held in very high esteem. Sir Bill Wiggin.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Phosphates leaching into the River Wye could be stopped by proven phosphate stripping technology attached to anaerobic digesters. But Herefordshire Council's bypass-hating Green and Independent group won't support or engage despite a moratorium on house building. What can he do to save our river and remove the council from such a vital, strategic and environmental responsibility? Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The River Wye obviously is of huge importance to nature. We're taking action to tackle pollution and raise farming standards. He'll know about the Environment Agency's farm inspection capacity and catchment sensitive farming advice programme, and I defer to his technical knowledge in this area. I'm sure he'll want to make submissions to the local authority.
Deputy Leader of the Opposition, Angela Rayner.
Madam Deputy Speaker, and welcome back into the chair. And can I share the Deputy Prime Minister's words on our Baroness and our thoughts with her family today? And I'm sure the whole House will join me also in paying tribute to Paul O'Grady after his sad death was announced today. He was a national treasure and a true Northern star, and he will be greatly missed. Madam Deputy Speaker, this week the government announced their so-called anti-social behaviour policy. It's only taken 13 years. And look, I'll give him some credit. The Deputy Prime Minister knows firsthand the misery caused by thugs and their intimidating behaviour, lurking with menace, exploding in fits of rage, creating a culture of fear, and maybe even, I don't know, throwing things. So can I ask him, under his new anti-social behaviour, does he think more bullies will be brought to justice?
Madam Deputy Speaker, I can reassure the House I've never called anyone scum. Communities and people who suffer at the scourge of antisocial behaviour should back our plan to deal more swiftly with these issues, to make sure that we ban drugs beyond the conventional ones, give police the powers they need, and if they really want to protect the public, they'll back our plans for parole reform to make sure the murderers, the terrorists, the child killers are not allowed out free to threaten other people, and reintroduce the ministerial veto that side took away.
Deputy Speaker, I'd like to see the ministerial code being introduced and adhered to on that side of the House, because it's not just his department where antisocial behaviour is running out of control. It's happening across the country. Police officers disappearing from our streets, replaced by criminals, plaguing our towns and leaving people feeling unsafe. The truth is that the Conservatives are missing in action in the fight against crime. So can he tell his constituents and the public why, after 13 years of his party in government, there are now 6,000 fewer neighbourhood police officers on Britain's streets?
Madam Deputy Speaker, she really does have a brass neck, because they voted against our funding of police recruitment and the 20,000 extra police officers. But what I will tell her and the whole House is crime is lower than it was under the last Labour government. Violent crime is halved. Reoffending is 7 percentage points lower. And if she really wants to stand up for the public and the victims of crime, they should back our bill to protect victims and protect the most vulnerable from serious killers, rapists and terrorists.
Madam Deputy Speaker, no one believes that there's more police on the streets and no one feels safer. Neighbourhood policing has gone down and not up. Let's talk about crime. He knows as well as I do that neighbourhood police can help prevent antisocial behaviour and knife crime. But trusted local police are also crucial to protecting women. Women feel unsafe on Britain's streets, always looking over our shoulder as we hurry to our front door. So can he tell me, under his watch as Justice Secretary, what is the charge rate for rape?
Can I address all of those elements of that? And first of all say that the issue of rape and serious sexual violence against women is one of our top priorities. She asked what we're doing about it. Since 2019, police referrals of cases are doubled. CPS charges have doubled. She asked on my watch what has happened. The volume of convictions in rape cases increased by 2/3. And if she really wants to protect vulnerable women, whether it's rapists or from rapists or other serious crimes, they will back our parole reforms, which will mean ministers able to prevent them being released onto the public and cause more threats.
He says that rape conviction has gone up. What he really means is that 300 women will be raped today, while he boasts about an increase of 0.5%. He hasn't answered my question, Madam Deputy Speaker, because he's too ashamed of the answer. 1.6% of rapists face being charged for their crime. 1.6%. Let that sink in. A woman goes through the worst experience of her life. She summons up the courage to relive that horrendous experience, to tell the police in detail about her assault. But she only has a 1.6% chance of action being taken. Over 98% of rapists will never see the inside of a courtroom, let alone a prison. And the rest of those brave women, Madam Deputy Speaker, they keep looking over their shoulders and hope the perpetrator doesn't choose tonight to take their revenge for reporting the incident to the police. In the last 13 years of the Tory government, more than 500,000 cases of rape have been recorded by the police. But the charge rate for those attacks have collapsed. He has served under 5 Tory Prime Ministers and had 3 years as Justice Minister. And on his watch, rapists are left to roam the streets. So will he apologise to those victims who will never get justice because of his failures?
I'll first of all say to the Right Honourable Lady, the conviction rate measured by the CPS, the leader of the Labour Party used to be in charge of the CPS, he might want to point this out. Well, actually, the conviction rate has gone up. It is now at 69%. We are doing much more to support the victims of rape when they come forward. Well, they're talking a good game. In fact, we have quadrupled funding for victims since 2010. And if she looks at the latest data, the time it's taken from charge to completion of a rape case has come down by 10 weeks or 70% in the last 3 months alone. She should get her facts straight, particularly when talking about such a sensitive issue.
Madam Deputy Speaker, he won't apologise for the government's failures on charge rates, and 69% of 1.6%. Is that really something to boast about? Let me ask him about an issue which is directly his responsibility. On his watch, rape survivors are waiting on average more than 3 years for their cases to come to court. The Honourable Member talked about 10-week reduction. 3 years, Deputy Leader. 3 years. So 10 weeks is not anything to boast about. Those 3 years from the day of the assault to the final day of court. Is it any wonder that from April till September last year, 175 trials for rape and other serious sexual offences have had to be dropped because the victim could no longer cope with the delay? So let me ask him, when will he apologise to all those women denied justice because of his failure to sort the court backlog?
Well, she ignores the impact on the court backlog of the pandemic or indeed the CBA strike. But let me tell her what we're doing. We've quadrupled funding for victims since 2010, quadrupled the funding provided by the last Labour government. We launched the 24/7 support line so that when those victims of that appalling crime come forward, they get the support they need. We've increased the number of independent sexual violence advisors to over 1,000, and we're making sure that women that suffer this appalling crime can give pre-recorded evidence in court. We're doing everything that we can, and as I said, the rates are coming down, and we will keep taking action in this area. Is she really? If the Labour Party were really serious about this, they wouldn't have voted against longer sentences for dangerous, violent and sexual offenders in the Police Crime Sentencing and Courts Act, and she would get behind our Victims and Prisoner Bill today.
Madam Deputy Speaker, not a word of apology, no sense of responsibility and not even a shred of shame. The reality is, while people in Britain feel more and more unsafe, he seems to spend all of his time trying to save his own job and none of his time on his actual job. And it's not just me that thinks so. The Prime Minister clearly doesn't trust him to deal with antisocial behaviour because he's given that job to the Levelling Up Secretary. The way things are going, and reports are to be believed, this might be your last PMQs. So let's look at the highlights. A criminal justice on its knees, the largest court backlog on record, rape victims waiting for justice, and through it all he managed to rack up 24 formal complaints from his own civil servants. So can he say today, will he walk before he's pushed?
Madam Deputy Speaker, one thing never changes. She always comes with the usual bluster and political opportunism. Let me tell the Right Honourable Lady what we've been doing, what I've been doing this week. We've delivered new legislation to support the victims of crime, including rape, and to protect the public. We've delivered a plan to stamp out antisocial behaviour, and we've supported families with their energy bills. What's she done? What have the Labour front bench done? They tried to block our small boats bill, and that's the difference between them and us. We deliver for Britain. She likes to play her political games.
Madam Deputy Speaker, and it is wonderful to see you in your place. As my right honourable friend will be aware, the Thames Freeport was recently given the final go-ahead to become fully operational, creating thousands of jobs and attracting millions in inward investment. Will my right honourable friend join me in congratulating the team behind the bid and encourage businesses and investors from across the South East, indeed across the world, to take a closer look at the fantastic opportunities that exist in Thurrock? And will he work with local education providers to ensure my constituents have the skills needed to take up these fantastic opportunities?
Can I thank my honourable friend? I certainly do support and pay tribute to all of those who have made the new Thames Freeport possible with its potential to deliver over 12,000 new jobs. I look forward to seeing the local community and the wider communities benefit from the tax benefits, the customs zones, and we'll see how these plans progress. And again, I think it's good news to see the communities in Basildon and Thurrock taking full advantage of the Brexit opportunities.
Deputy Leader of the SNP, Murray Black. Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I also wish to send my warm regards to the family of Paul O'Grady, the legendary drag queen, for all he's done for my community. I also want to congratulate Humza Yousaf as he becomes First Minister of Scotland, as the first Scots, Asian and Muslim to hold such an office. I'm sure the whole House will send his warm regards. Now, in recent days, video footage has emerged of the former Chancellor and the former Chair of the 1922 Committee offering their services for £60,000 on top of their MP's salary. The former Health Secretary offered his wisdom for £10,000 a day.
Going once.
Can I ask the Deputy Prime Minister, when he is inevitably booted out of office, what will his going rate be?
Well, can I welcome her the chamber. The system of declarations is there to ensure transparency and accountability, and of course the Conservatives backed tightening up those rules to make sure that there couldn't be any lobbying. But can I also join with, except to take her up on her tribute to the new First Minister of Scotland. The Prime Minister spoke to him last night. We welcome him to his place, and of course the government want to work constructively with him in the best interest of the people of Scotland.
Murray Black. During a cost of living crisis, as his colleagues eye up barrels of cash from fake companies, it's the people across these aisles that are being led by donkeys, and they're sitting on. Now, the former Health Secretary also said that he would impart his wisdom for £1,500 an hour. Most nurses earn little above £15 an hour. Who does the Deputy Prime Minister think's best value for money and for the public?
Well, I'm delighted that the majority of the health unions have accepted the pay settlement. We think that that's absolutely right. And she raises the issue, and of course we've worked with on a cross-party basis to curb the limits on second earnings. I noticed the benches on this side are curiously quiet. Is that because there's 10 shadow cabinet members on their benches who are taking earnings? In particular, the shadow foreign secretary looks like he certainly doesn't want to be under the limelight. He's got earned second earnings from 40 different sources. I don't think they can talk about it. And as far as the Honourable Lady is concerned, we've done everything we can to make sure there's transparency and accountability.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. It's very good to see you back in this place. Stoke-on-Trent has been announced as one of the Levelling Up partnerships, and this is on top of the investment we've already received through programmes like the Levelling Up Fund. And this is being delivered thanks to Conservatives working together in government and on the City Council, led by the formidable councillor Abby Brown. So would my right honourable friend agree with me, if people want to continue to see the levelling up of opportunities in Stoke-on-Trent, they should vote Conservative in the local elections in May?
Well, my honourable friend is absolutely right, and after years of neglect under Labour, it's now the Conservatives, in no small part thanks to my honourable friend, who have been levelling up in Stoke-on-Trent, £11 million from the Shared Prosperity Fund, £12 million from the Levelling Up Fund, £4 million from the Regional Growth Fund, and that's supporting over 500 jobs and £28 million of private investment. That's the difference for the people of Stoke under a Conservative government.
Sir Geoffrey Donaldson.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Yesterday, the Secretary of State told us that the Security Service, MI5, have increased the terrorism threat level in Northern Ireland to severe. Responsibility for dealing with terrorism and national security rests with the Government of the United Kingdom, including in Northern Ireland. Will the Deputy Prime Minister assure me and the people of Northern Ireland that the Government will provide the Police Service of Northern Ireland and the Security Service with the resources that they need to counter this serious terrorist threat?
Deputy Prime Minister.
Can I thank the honourable gentleman? He's absolutely right. Of course the threat level is kept under constant review. We take into account a range of factors. He'll be very familiar with those. It's disappointing that the threat level has gone up, but I think it is worth also saying that it has been in significant decline in terms of the number of Northern Ireland-related terrorist attacks and attempted attacks since the peak of the violence in 2009, 2010. Nonetheless, of course, we will make sure all the resources available to the PSNI and the public are reminded to remain vigilant and report any suspicious behaviour or activity.
James Grundy.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. In my recent local survey as to whether Lee should break away from Wigan Council, I am very pleased to say that so far the survey shows 90% in favour, with only 3% opposed. Please, I mean, before you call for a second referendum, let me finish the question. Does my right honourable friend agree that in the 50th year of our campaign for our town's independence, that this is the year to get Lexit done?
My honourable friend campaigns with typical gusto. I think he knows that changing the boundaries at local authority level is subject to an independent process, but I will ensure he gets a meeting with the Minister for Local Government so he can further discuss the aspirations for Lake.
Cat Smith.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Despite Royal Mail posting record profits, management are threatening to put it into administration. Can I ask what conversations government is having with Royal Mail and what it's doing to protect the Universal Postal Service?
Deputy Prime Minister.
It's an incredibly difficult time. Can I thank her for her question? Obviously, the pandemic has had a particular impact, but we're working very closely to make sure we can continue the service, and I'll make sure she gets a meeting with the relevant minister to discuss her concerns further.
Mark Eastwood.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. On behalf of the people of Dewsbury, I would also like to pay tribute to Dewsbury's greatest daughter, Betty Boothroyd. She was sorely missed. This week I visited Ravenhall School in Dewsbury and Hollybank School in Mirfield. Both do amazing work teaching children with special educational needs and disabilities. However, there is disparity in SEND standards in mainstream schools within my constituency. Would my right honourable friend join me in thanking the teachers and staff at Ravensall and Hollybank for everything they do, and could he also outline how we can ensure all our children are given the best chance in life regardless of which school they go to?
Deputy Prime Minister.
Can I thank my honourable friend and pay tribute to the teachers and the staff at both schools, Ravensall and Hollybank, for the amazing work they do. It's a very difficult and challenging job and incredibly important for the life chances of those children affected. He'll know that in March we published the SEND and Alternative Provision Improvement Plan with new national standards, and that's backed up by an increased specialist provision locally with £2.6 billion going into it, and that includes opening 33 new special schools with a further 49 in the pipeline.
Douglas Chapman.
While the Prime Minister is absent, I hope he later gets a chance to watch the BBC dramatisation, The Brinksmat Robbery, which was held in the 1980s, where the police team assigned to the recovery of this gold only got back half of the gold that was stolen. That sum pales into insignificance compared with the measly 1% from the £1 billion of business grants that was lost to the fraud issued by the Prime Minister under his watch when he was Chancellor. The fingerprints show that this massive fraud now lies at 10 Downing Street. To quote your former fraud minister, Lord Bolton, when will this government get its act together and step up the recovery efforts on behalf of the taxpayer?
Deputy Prime Minister.
Well, the instance of fraud have become much more complex with the online instance, but he will have noted the massive increase in funding for tackling fraud in the recent budget, and we're confident that will give us the resources we need to tackle this often invisible but very damaging crime.
Sir Robert Neal.
The Deputy Prime Minister will know that stroke is the greatest cause of adult disability in this country and costs our economy some £26 billion, never mind destroying lives. Last year I met Dr John Stevens, who was unable even to sit up unaided after a stroke, but because of emergency thrombectomy procedure is now back at work as a GP in the NHS. Sadly, only 30% of eligible patients actually get thrombectomies. Will the Deputy Prime Minister agree that we need greatly to increase the rollout of thrombectomy procedures, and would he perhaps, in the run-up to World Thrombectomy Day next month, join me in visiting a thrombectomy centre to see at first hand the difference it can make to lives and to getting people back into meaningful and productive work and enjoyment?
Prime Minister.
Well, can I thank my honourable friend? He's been a dedicated champion for stroke survivors. I know from my own constituency how debilitating that can be and the impact it has on the wider families. NHS England are committed to increasing the delivery of mechanical thrombectomy, including the expansion of local services and local capital investment, and I'm sure we can arrange for a health minister to join him on a visit as he requests.
Sarah Olney.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. In a shocking article in Surrey Live last year, it was reported that staff at a GP practice in Walton were left in tears and crumbling under pressure due to the increased workload caused by staff shortages. Is it any wonder when there are 850 fewer GPs across the country since 2019? So what does the Deputy Prime Minister say to those patients left in pain and staff left in tears, including in his own constituency, due to this government's failed promise to recruit more GPs?
Like, can I say to her, any abuse against any GP in any practice across the country is absolutely wrong. We have to have zero tolerance of it. What I would just say to her is we've seen a large increase in GP appointments, over 29 million carried out since the start of the year. We're improving access to general practice with more support staff, also the technology, so more state-of-the-art telephone systems. The number of GPs in training is at record levels, and we're investing 1.5 billion to create 50 million more appointments a year by 2024.
If we go a bit faster, we'll get everybody in. Scott Benton.
Since 2019, this government has provided well over £300 million in extra funding for projects in Blackpool. However, there is always room for more. The Bond Street and Weather areas of my constituency are among the most deprived in the country and have been long forgotten by the Labour-led council. The government has already provided £600,000 in funding for a feasibility project with a view to delivering a £30 million regeneration package for these areas. Will the government look closely at the business case to see how this transformational project can be delivered for those communities?
Order, before the Deputy Prime Minister answers that, can everyone else with a prepared question just cut it in half? Just do the question. Deputy Prime Minister.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. There is no one more tenacious in campaigning for Blackpool than the Honourable Gentleman. I've seen it firsthand when I visited with him. I'm pleased that we delivered with the Levelling Up Secretary the £40 million of funding to relocate the Magistrates' Court and to allow the County Court complex to move. And I know that the Levelling Up Secretary will want to work with him on the regeneration aspirations for the future.
Wendy Chamberlain.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. A little girl in my constituency, only 9 years old, developed a bacterial infection just before Christmas, but thereafter very distressing symptoms occurred. OCD, she has intrusive thoughts, she hasn't washed, dressed or properly eaten since Christmas. We believe this to be Pan's Panda, and although health has evolved and I am seeking support for her, part of the lottery and the antipsychotic medication that is often given in this condition, despite the fact that broad-based antibiotics have been proven to work, is because the UK, no part of the UK, has implemented World Health Organisation ICD-11. Will the government commit to looking at this so that other children across the UK don't need to suffer in such a way?
Deputy Prime Minister.
Can I thank the Honourable Lady for raising what seems like a very an awful case, and my heart goes out to the family involved. If she'd like to write with me about it, I'll make sure she gets a full answer and a meeting with the Minister if that's required.
Caroline Nooks.
Georgia Harrison is an incredibly brave young woman who only got justice when she was a victim of revenge porn because she could prove that the perpetrator intended to cause her distress. Most victims can't, and perpetrators are using platforms to use revenge porn for financial gain. That's not covered in the legislation. Will my right honourable friend commit to looking at the case studies Georgia has compiled and reviewing this legislation to strengthen it and make it more effective?
Deputy Prime Minister.
Can I thank the Honourable Lady, my honourable friend, my right honourable friend, for all that she's done in this area. I know that there have been a considerable number of changes to the Online Safety Bill, not least because of her forensic attention to detail. They will include the creation of a new base offence of sharing intimate images without consent that don't require proof of an intention to cause distress. And of course the government also supports the Revenge Porn Helpline, which offers free and confidential advice. If there are any further changes that she thinks need to be made, very happy to look at them with her.
Sir Chris Bryant.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I don't know whether the Deputy Prime Minister ever met Lily Savage. Or has ever spent a night out at the Royal Vauxhall Tavern. But Lily was... I can take him sometime if he wants to go. I think that was a yes, actually, yeah. But Lily was performing at the height of the AIDS crisis in 1987. when police officers raided the pub, arrested her amongst others. They were wearing rubber gloves because supposedly they're protecting themselves from contracting HIV from touching gay men. Lily amazingly said at the time, "Oh, lads, you've come to do the washing up. That's great." Her alter ego, Paul O'Grady, campaigned acerbically and hilariously for elderly people, for care workers, against oppression of every kind. Isn't it time we in this country celebrated our naughty, hilarious drag queens and comics of every kind who inspire us to be a better and more generous nation?
Can I thank the Honourable Gentleman? I totally agree with him. And Paul Grayson was an incredible comic, but he also... But Lily's... Paul O'Grady. But in terms of Lily Savage also, I think some of that comedy broke glass ceilings and broke boundaries in a way that certainly politicians would struggle to do. So I agree with that. I also think it shows how we need greater, more rambunctious free speech, and we need to avoid the wokery and the limitations on comedy, which I'm afraid both of them would have had no time for.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I'd like to associate myself with the words of the Honourable Gentleman from Rhondda. Paul O'Grady was a great champion for animal welfare as well. Madam Deputy Speaker, the biggest cause of death for children in this country under the age of 14 is cancer. As she knows, I've been calling for a childhood cancer mission to radically change how we detect, how we treat and how we care for children with cancer. Everything from genome science for detection right the way through to 7-day-a-week play facilities in children's ward. The Health Secretary's been brilliant. He's met with me and has been really positive on this. But will the Deputy Prime Minister restate the government's support for a childhood cancer mission?
Deputy Prime Minister.
I thank my honourable friend. I certainly will. And the suffering that any child must go through when they get a condition like cancer at such an early age, difficult to believe, and the pressure on the families, incredible. So I thank her for her work. The DHSC will publish a major condition strategy to look at improving outcomes and experience for all cancer patients, but including in particular children. I can't preempt that, but I know it will draw on previous work, including submissions from the various childhood cancer charities. And again, I pay tribute to the work that they do.
Stephanie Peacock.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. My 6-year-old constituent Daniel has cerebral palsy and mitochondrial disease. He has received palliative care from the Bluebell Wood Children's Hospital, who were forced to temporarily close last year due to staffing pressures. They have ongoing concerns about rising bills. Will the Deputy Prime Minister reassure Daniel's family that he will receive the palliative care he requires as and when he needs it?
Prime Minister.
Can I thank her for raising that very important case that she does. I don't know all the facts of it, but if she writes to me, I'm very happy to look at it. We will make sure the resourcing, but also the care is there. And if, again, as I say, if she writes to me, I'm sure we can arrange for a meeting with the relevant minister.
Wendy Morton.
Madam Deputy Speaker, the inclusion of the West Midlands as a hotspot trailblazer police force area in the antisocial behaviour action plan is really good news. Could my right honourable friend outline, though, how communities such as those in my constituency on the periphery of the West Midlands will see and feel the positive difference that this will bring, and that we won't simply see a redirecting of our valuable resources by the Labour Police and Crime Commissioner into other parts of the West Midlands?
Deputy Prime Minister.
Well, can I thank my right honourable friend? She raised a really important point. The Antisocial Behaviour Action Plan will help us crack down and make sure on antisocial behaviour and make sure that those responsible conduct and undergo repairs within 48 hours, things like cleaning up litter and graffiti. In terms of the West Midlands enhanced hotspot, I'm delighted they'll be getting that additional funding. She's right for the PCCs to determine the precise allocation of funding, but I'm sure she'll make her representations in the usual powerful way.
Mary Glendon.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Announcing her retirement, North Tyneside-born Sarah Hunter MBE played her final game of rugby at the opening Women's Six Nations match at Kingston Park last Saturday. Sarah is the most capped international rugby player in the world, a true professional, great ambassador for her sport and an inspiration to so many. Will the Deputy Prime Minister join with me, the whole of North Tyneside and this House in thanking Sarah for all she has achieved for the country and her beloved sport of rugby?
Can I thank the honourable lady? She's absolutely right. I pay tribute to the trailblazing record of Sarah. I had the opportunity a few years ago to watch the England female rugby team. I was blown away, and we look forward to her and them going on to bigger and better things.
Richard Fuller.
Madam Deputy Speaker, will the government require that the East West Rail Company publish a full business case before the allocation of any more taxpayers' money to the project?
Deputy Prime Minister.
Thank you. It's a hugely important project with all sorts of opportunities, jobs, education, and a projected increase in economic output by over 100 billion by 2050. He's right that it needs all the transparency and scrutiny. I know that the first stage of the project is already in construction, on time and under budget. I'm told that the subsequent stages will go through full scrutiny as part of the planning process in a transparent way.
David Linden.
The Prime Minister has previously been on camera as saying that he didn't have any working class friends. When he's not taking his luxury helicopter rides and splashing about in his private pool, where might the Deputy Prime Minister recommend that he might befriend somebody from the working class?
Deputy Prime Minister.
I'm not sure I got the full extent of the question, but the reality is we're doing, and you can see that with the energy price guarantee, the free childcare and the national living wage, that we are supporting everyone in this country, particularly those on the lowest paid jobs.
And the final question, Alicia Cairns.
This week, Rutlander Andrew Osborne solo sailed 3,000 miles, taking 78 days across the Atlantic Ocean. He raised £142,000 for cardiac risk in the young after his daughter Amy died in her sleep, aged 25, being discovered by her sister the next morning. 1 in 12 children die every week of undiagnosed heart conditions. So can my right honourable friend please reassure me what we are doing to increase the diagnosis of undiagnosed heart conditions in children and young people?
Deputy Prime Minister.
Can I thank my honourable friend for raising this, and our heartfelt condolences go to the family of Amy, but likewise our congratulations go to Andrew on an incredible feat. The fact that 12 young people die every week from an undiagnosed heart condition is something we all want to see an end to. There's more resource going in, there's more research going in, and I'll arrange for a meeting between her and the relevant minister.
Thank you. We will shortly move to the statement, but I will pause briefly.
With both Dominic Raab and Angela Rayner sitting in because the Prime Minister and the Leader of the Opposition at the funeral for Betty Boothroyd. There is going to be a statement now from Robert Jenrick, the Immigration Minister, on the, as we believe will be the unveiling of these new centres, 2 RAF bases to house migrants, and perhaps also details about cruise ships or barges. But let's just reflect with our MPs here on what we've heard. Sally Ann Hart and Graham Stringer with us. Well, I think we can go straight back to the Commons, actually. Mr Jenrick on his feet already.
On illegal migration. 3 months ago, my right honourable friend, the Prime Minister, set out a comprehensive plan to tackle illegal migration. We said we would act, and we have. We've increased immigration enforcement visits to their highest levels in recent years. Since December, more than 3,500 enforcement visits have been carried out, and more than 4,000 people with no right to be here have been removed. Anglo-French cooperation is now closer than ever before and will be deepened because of the deal struck by the Prime Minister earlier this month. We've expanded our partnership with Rwanda to include the relocation of all those who pass through safe countries to make illegal and dangerous journeys to the United Kingdom. Our modern slavery reforms, introduced as part of the Nationality and Borders Act to prevent those who seek to abuse our generosity from doing so, are bearing fruit. We're tackling the backlog with our asylum system by cutting unnecessary paperwork and simplifying country guidance. As a result, productivity has increased, and we are on track to process the backlog of initial asylum decisions by the end of the year. Madam Deputy Speaker, we must ensure our laws enable us to deal with the global migration crisis, which is why we have brought forward the Illegal Migration Bill. The bill goes further than any previous immigration legislation to fix the problem of small boats, whilst remaining within the boundaries of our treaty obligations. And of course, As we reform the asylum system, we will continue to honour our country-specific and global safe and legal commitments. But we cannot and will not stop here, Madam Deputy Speaker, because illegal migration continues to impact the British public in their day-to-day lives. The sheer number of small boats have overwhelmed our asylum system and forced the government to place asylum seekers in hotels. These hotels take valuable assets from communities and place pressures on local public services. Seaside towns have lost tourist trade, weddings have been cancelled, and local councils have had their resources diverted to manage them. And the hard-working British taxpayer has been left to foot the eye-watering £2.3 billion a year bill. Madam Deputy Speaker, we must not elevate the well-being of illegal migrants above those of the British people. It is in their interests that we are sent here. The enduring solution to stop the boats is to take the actions outlined in our bill. But in the meantime, it is right that we act to correct the injustice of the current situation. I have heard time and again of councils up and down the country struggling to accommodate arrivals. This is no easy task. The government recognises that placing asylum seekers into local areas comes at a cost. And so central government will now provide further financial support. Today we're announcing a new funding package which includes generous additional per-bed payments and continuation of the funding for every new dispersal bed available. We will also pilot an additional incentive payment where those properties are made available faster. But faced with the scale of the challenge, we must fundamentally alter our posture towards those who seek to enter our country illegally. This government remains committed to meeting our legal obligations to those who would otherwise be destitute. But we're not prepared to go further. Accommodation for migrants should meet their essential living needs and nothing more, because we cannot risk becoming a magnet for the millions of people who are displaced and seeking better economic prospects. Many of our European partners are struggling with the same issue. Belgium, Ireland, Germany and France are having to take similar steps, and the UK must adapt to this changing context. I've said before that we have to suffuse our entire system with deterrence, and this must include how we house illegal migrants. So today the government is announcing the first tranche of sites we will set up to provide basic accommodation at scale. The government will use military sites being disposed of in Essex and Lincolnshire and a separate site in East Sussex. These will be scaled up over the coming months and will collectively provide accommodation to several thousand asylum seekers through repurposed barrack blocks and porter cabins. In addition, my right honourable friend the Prime Minister is showing leadership on this issue by bringing forward proposals to provide accommodation at Catterick Garrison Barracks in his constituency. And we're continuing to explore the possibility of accommodating migrants in vessels, as they are in Scotland and in the Netherlands. Madam Deputy Speaker, I want to be clear. These sites on their own will not end the use of hotels overnight. But alongside local dispersal and other forms of accommodation, which we will bring forward in due course, they will relieve pressure on our communities, and they will manage asylum seekers in a more appropriate and cost-effective way. Of course, we recognise the concerns of local residents, and we're acutely aware of the need to minimise the impact of these sites on communities. Basic healthcare will be available, around-the-clock security will be provided on site, and our providers will work closely with local police and other partners. Funding will be provided to local authorities in which these sites are located. Madam Deputy Speaker, these sites are undoubtedly in the national interest. We have to deliver them if we're to stop the use of hotels. We have to deliver them to save the British public from spending eye-watering amounts accommodating illegal migrants. And we have to deliver them to prevent a pull factor for economic migrants on the continent taking hold. Madam Deputy Speaker, inaction is not an option. The British people rightly want us to tackle illegal migration. As I've set out today, we are doing exactly that, and I commend this statement to the House.
Shadow Secretary of State Yvette Cooper.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Madam Deputy Speaker, today's statement is an admission of failure.
Yeah.
Maybe that's why the Home Secretary has asked the Immigration Minister to make it instead. 4 years ago, the Cabinet said they would halve channel crossings. They've gone up 20-fold since then. A year ago, they said they'd end hotel use. They've opened more than ever. They keep making new announcements, but it just keeps getting worse.
Yeah.
And people want to see strong border security and properly managed asylum and refugee systems so that the UK does its bit to help those fleeing persecution and conflict alongside other countries. But we have got neither of those at the moment. There's no point in blaming everyone else because they are in charge. The asylum system is broken because they broke it. They have let criminal gangs rip along the channel. People smuggler convictions have halved in the last 4 years, even though more boats and more gangs have been crossing. And yet Tory MPs yesterday voted against Labour's plan for cross-border police units to go after the gangs. They've let asylum decision-making collapse. We've had a big increase in staff, but 40% fewer cases being decided. So they failed to take basic decisions, and they're still not doing Labour's plan to fast-track last year's arrivals from Albania and other safe countries. And as for today's announcements, Madam Deputy Speaker, we need to end costly and inappropriate hotel use, but these plans don't do that. The Ministers had to admit, contrary to all of the briefing in the papers this morning, they won't end hotel use. Instead, these sites are additional, and Ministers should have been finding cheaper sites and properly managing costs years ago. Today's damning report from the government's own independent watchdog, which strangely the Minister did not mention today, says there's been no cost control, that the Home Office contracts are highly inefficient, no cross-government transparency and oversight, officials didn't have financial information on the contracts they were signing, didn't compare costs, and most ludicrously of all, and I quote, different parts of the Home Office operating different schemes at times found themselves competing for the same hotel contracts, driving prices up. Totally chaotic. Basically, they've written a whole load of cheques in a panic. If they had put that money into clearing the backlog instead, we wouldn't be in this mess now. And they should have been working with councils to do this, but they didn't. Yesterday, Tory MPs again voted against Labour's plans for a legal requirement for councils to be consulted. Instead, he has Conservative councils backed by Conservative MPs taking action against him. So can he confirm that the Foreign Secretary is backing legal action against the Home Secretary? Frankly, that is a first even for this chaotic government. And the bill makes things worse. No return agreements with France or Europe. The Prime Minister has just said the Home Secretary was wrong. The Rwanda flights won't start this summer. They've nowhere to send people to, and instead of speeding up asylum decisions, they're just going to cancel them. So that means more people in asylum, accommodation and hotels, and more flim-flam headlines that just don't stack up. Today, it was barges. And it turns out there aren't any. Desperate to distract everyone from the damage they might want to do to the dambusters' heritage, instead they start talking about ferries and barges. 3 years ago they said the same thing. Last summer the Prime Minister said it would be cruise liners. The Home Office civil servant said ferries would end up costing more than the hotels they're already spending so much money on. So instead the Immigration Minister has been sent round the country with a copy of Waterways Weekly trying to find barges instead, and he still hasn't found any. So can he tell us, are these sites then going to be additional, not instead of hotel use? Will he still be using more hotels or less for asylum seekers in 6 months' time? of the 45,000 people at the boat arrivals last year, can he confirm that more than 90% of decisions have not been taken because the backlog is still their failure? And will he apologise for their failure on cost control? They failed to support Labour's plan to go after the gangs, get a new agreement with France and to fast-track decisions and returns. They are flailing around in a panic.
So, this is Yvette Cooper going through a fairly long list of what she says are the government failings on this particular immigration issue and the asylum policy, but touching on something quite interesting, indicating, as far as she is aware, the Home Office competing for the same hotel rooms against each other, driving up the price. Let's actually get the view of Sally Ann Hart on that, because you were just indicating that you've got a hotel in your constituency, Hastings and Rye, which is housing asylum seekers. I mean, what do you make of that particular point, that the Home Office has been driving up its own prices, effectively?
Well, I hope that that is not the case, because if that is true, then that really does need to be looked at. I think we need to really focus, as well as getting the proper legislation in place, which is what this government is doing, is also looking at the operations of the Home Office and ensuring that that is streamlined and properly carried out.
In terms of the asylum claims themselves?
Yeah.
Yeah. Your eyebrows did head towards the ceiling when East Sussex was announced as one of these potential sites. You've had no indication that that might be the case?
No, and I can't think of anywhere in Hastings and Rye that that would be appropriate, but I'm keen to know where in East Sussex there may be a potential site. It must be a former government estates type location.
Yeah, I know that there's a former nuclear bunker at the top of the Ashdown Forest with a sort of training centre for the police now, but whether a nuclear bunker would be suitable, I don't know. Graham, clearly Yvette Cooper going on the attack, an admission of failure, she said, because pressing on the point, are these two RAF bases, possibly barges, who knows, in addition to the hotel rooms that they'll still have to provide?
And we're not watching the minister responding, but my guess is he doesn't know. I mean, it's an extraordinary litany of failure to do anything, to take action over a number of years, and now action is being taken. What they're doing, or part of what is happening, is they're driving a coach and horses through their own anti-modern slavery Act, which was a good thing the government did, the Anti-Modern Slavery Act. But the bill that's going through the Commons at the moment means that people who are brought here as modern slaves will be deported very quickly under the Act. So it's a mess. And do you know what it reeked of? I mean, it reeked of the financial mess and corruption there was around personal protective equipment sales during COVID, the mess that there was.
But we have the National Audit Office, obviously, that will run the slide rule over all these issues. It is, however, the bigger picture that the numbers are now so overwhelming that no matter what government or whatever political persuasion, these are real headaches, just literally trying to cope with the numbers involved.
Well, that's right, but it's got out of control. Action could have been taken much sooner on this, but it hadn't. As Yvette said, the government keeps making announcements that they're going to do X, Y and Z, and the problem keeps getting worse. We can disagree on the solutions, but effectively, nothing effective has been done over the last 5 years.
And we have heard about cruise liners and ships before, haven't we? That is, Yvette Cooper's quite right in that fact.
Yes, and I think you have to explore all the options, because actually it would help if the Labour Party backed our legislation to try and stop the criminal smuggling gangs, and that's what we're dealing with here. We're making the legislation. We're trying to be one step ahead of these criminal smuggling gangs. They literally will choose some other way of smuggling people into the UK. We've got to keep track of that, keep ahead of it, and get the legislation in place at the right time. Labour doesn't back our legislation, so they've clearly got no interest in stopping this problem.
Yeah, what do you make, however, of this political point being made by Robert Jenrick, the pull factor, i.e. the suggestion that, you know, a nice cosy hotel room is being quite attractive for those coming across the channel? Because there are those families with children being housed in these hotel rooms. One wonders what the conditions will be in what's called essential living needs if there are families and children involved.
I think we've got to face the fact that criminal smuggling gangs promise people that they will get housing, a job, they'll get looked after, welfare when they come over. Even our European neighbours are, you know, fed up with the fact that these people want to come to Britain because they think they're going to get a cushy ride. And that's why we've got to have a real deterrence. Hotel rooms are not appropriate to have families in them. And I think that's where we've really got to look at the options available. And we've got to grip this problem. There is no question about it.
And if it was a Labour government trying to cope with this, what would the options be available? You've physically got to get people in under cover somewhere.
Yes, one has, but one has to reduce the numbers as well.
But I mean, a lot of this is to cope with the existing
a lot of this
numbers.
is historic because there's been a failure to provide the right levels of policing to smash these people smuggling gangs up and to arrest them. Not enough has been done by the government. But there is a pull factor. It's not just hotel rooms. I don't know if you ever get your car washed, but you go into any car wash and I think it's something like 85% of those people are not in lawful employment.
I'm just going to interrupt our analysis because we have pictures coming in from Berlin of the King and Queen Consort arriving. That is the official government plane. The significance being, of course, that is the first official state visit by the King and Queen Consort because, of course, we've been reporting they were due in Paris and clearly that was postponed after the protests, particularly in Bordeaux, where the town hall was set on fire. The King and Queen Consort had been due there yesterday, so that was postponed. But he is now arriving with the, I think, Royal Standard flying there at the front, being poked out the window of that Airbus. And we are getting some details of what's planned in terms of the visit to Berlin and, of course, the significance of that. And quite a few people expected on the streets, we believe. We should reflect that things aren't all that smooth in Germany at the moment. They've had strikes and they've had economic issues and so on as well.
They have. And all that, and problems with immigration. By the time they get to our French shores, it's too late. You talk about policing, it should be policed across Europe. Europe's got a real problem.
Because obviously the issue is that you claim the status in the first safe country that you arrive in.
Yeah, and of course Angela Merkel did open the doors, which I think has caused major problems throughout Europe. And I think this is not just a British problem with this illegal immigration. It's a Europe problem.
And in terms of the King's visit, I mean, this is so-called soft power. We saw, obviously, the Prime Minister meeting Macron in the Élysée Palace, but we were told that the efforts, perhaps, to reach a rapprochement with France and now with Germany is this new approach to get back to better relations with the rest of Europe.
I voted to leave the EU.
Yeah, you're a sceptic. You won't mind admitting that.
Yes, no, I'm proud of it. But that doesn't mean to say we have to have bad or poor relations with our neighbours. We need good relations with France, not least to help deal with the immigration problem we're talking about, but we need good relations with the whole of Europe in order to deal with many of the other problems there are apart from
Moscow, I guess.
Well, that is the big one. Yeah. The Russians, but environmental problems. We need to have as good diplomatic relationships as we can. And if King Charles helps with that, then it's a good thing.
Yeah. And in terms of this being the first state visit, I suppose all eyes will be on how it's conducted. We expect the King particularly to try and greet as many in the crowds that, this is the approach that he's taken so far.
He's a very hands-on king, like his mother was before him. And, he does the country proud.
A political king, even though he's not allowed to? Political with a small p, perhaps?
I think he's aware of the politics and he uses that to make sure that British interests are kept firmly in mind.
Yeah, well, the red carpet being rolled out there and, of course, in terms of Berlin, no doubt he will be visiting the Brandenburg Gate, and I was lucky enough to be there on the night of unification, or reunification, when both East and West came together. And I guess that's tying into this whole historic aspect of why it's Germany and France in terms of the first visits?
Yes, I think it is what you were saying before, that it is about improving diplomatic relations. Germany and France effectively set up European Union. And going there is more than symbolic. It has a symbolic value, but it also has a real value of saying we want to be friends. We want as good relationship as we can. I mean, his father was brought up partly in Germany. I mean, the royal family...
Well, Saxe-Coburg, of course. The whole issue then, I guess, in terms of Mountbatten or Windsor and what was the royal family going to be named, it was slightly sensitive at the time post-war.
Yes. But I agree with...
Oh, no, this is not what we want. Anyway, carry on.
Well, I agree. You know, we've exited the EU, the European Union, but we're still part of on the European continent, and it's absolutely vital that we maintain our friendly links with our European neighbours. That is essential. I mean, look how we led Europe against, you know, with supplying weapons and help to Ukraine. That was us. And was there a problem with Europe following? Not much, but we did leave that.
Yeah, although obviously for the Germans in particular, for obvious reasons post-war, had great difficulty deciding how far do we go in terms of becoming an active military power again, and the fact that we're relying on Russian oil.
Exactly. And I think you can understand the Germans worried about that because of their history becoming a military power, but they realise for the security and defence of Europe, they have got to step up, and they have.
Yeah, so bearing in mind the realpolitik, if we can use that phrase, with what's happened in Ukraine, does that underline the fact, and you know, you, as said, are Eurosceptic, that there has to be a united Europe, even if it isn't an EU as such?
There are really only two military powers in what is the European Union in the UK, and it's France and the United Kingdom. And we certainly need, as well as NATO, much better relationships, military relationships with France, because that is where the core of the defence of Europe will lie if the Russians carry on with their aggressive action. At the moment, we're helping Ukraine, but we don't know where the Russians will end, and we have to be prepared. Our defences are less than they were because we sent so many weapons to the Ukraine. So we need to coordinate and cooperate with France for military purposes.
Yeah, suggestions that nuclear arms, of course, being sent by Putin to Belarus now, and how that would alter the balance in terms of the Ukraine.
It's all very scary.
Yeah. Well, the official limousines are pulling up there. I have to thank you both, Graham and Sally Ann, for your time. We didn't even get to talk about the issues of PMQs, of course, which is the rape statistics. However, I think Angela Rayner did land a few blows on Dominic Raab. But thank you both for being our panel of MPs today. Let's actually stay with the pictures in Berlin with I think, substantial police outrider cohort just arriving there. I've lost count of the number of, I expect they are BMW bikes there, to actually get the royal cortege moving. And we do understand that at some stage the King plans to take a train, I think, perhaps, to attend Brandenburg. He wants to be seen to be using public transport, because I think there have been a number of strikes on public transport in Germany. Yes, I'll just let that sink in for those of you who've been following the RMT here in Britain. It is the case elsewhere in Europe. But there is the official royal car, the Bentley, which I think has got a BMW engine, I think I'm right in saying, even though it is a British car, as some would see it. But, of course, Bentley taken over by, or VW, I think, wasn't it? And anyway, our royal correspondent Cameron Walker is there as we see the Royal Standard flying there. And I think the band has struck up for you, Cameron, as well.
Yes, they have, Mark. The military bands have struck up, entertaining the crowds here at Brandenburg Gate, because that is the first stop for the King and the Queen Consort here in Berlin. Of course, it's the first state visit of the new reign, and for King Charles, it's the first time he's actually been abroad as monarch. And the whole point of this trip is strengthening relations between Britain and European partners post-Brexit. Buckingham Palace describes it as celebrating our shared histories, cultures and values. But of course, this is the slightly delayed state visit because it was meant to kick off on Sunday in France, but due to those protests, which we've been talking about all week, Mark, and some of which have clearly turned violent, the French government requested that the French part of the state visit, at least, would be postponed. But clearly this obviously all comes off the back of trying to strengthen European relations. The King met European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen last month following the agreement of the Windsor Framework. It's King Charles's 29th official visit to Germany and the first visit of a British monarch to the country for 8 years. But I think it's pretty interesting that Buckingham Palace, the King, and the British government have decided to choose a European nation rather than a Commonwealth nation for the first official state visits, because Queen Elizabeth II did her first Commonwealth tour back in 1953. But Buckingham Palace decides where to go on government advice, and it's all about that strengthening of relations. But at the Brandenburg Gate here a little bit later on, when the King gets here, it's going to be a ceremonial welcome. The first time ever a foreign head of state has received a ceremonial welcome by the German president at the Brandenburg Gate. Usually, I'm told, it happens at the presidential palace. So I think that perhaps gives a sense of the importance that both Germany and Britain is placing on this first state visit of the new reign. The King is also expected to become the first British monarch, first head of state to address the German Parliament, the Bundestag. That is happening tomorrow in Berlin. There's also engagements on the continuing war in Ukraine, military exercises between Britain and Germany, as well as meeting Ukrainian refugees who have settled in the country. And of course, with King Charles, there is sustainability and climate change in mind. You mentioned, Mark, that perhaps he's going to be taking public transport at one point, and that is very much on the agenda.
Interesting you touched on the fact about the Brandenburg Gate, which of course was the focal point for reunification after both the East and West Germany came together, a historic occasion that the King as Prince Charles at that time would have witnessed, and how that changed the course of modern Europe, and I guess in turn ties into what's happening now with issues of Ukraine and so on.
Oh, it absolutely has, and I think the King and Queen Consort's diaries are very much reflecting that. It's that collective togetherness, if you like, of European countries in the face of the war in Ukraine and the invasion by Russia. There's very much a focus on two things, really. First, the military side of things. The King is expected to view an exercise involving both British and German personnel in Brandenburg, the town just outside of Berlin. We believe that's happening tomorrow. And both the King and Queen Consort are expected to meet Ukrainian refugees as well. As for the crowd here, the King is very much expected to meet members of the public. There are crowds, I don't know if you've got a shot of it, but you can see crowds here. They're made up mainly of British embassy families, Royal British Legion as well, and of course other ordinary Germans as well. The King wants to be very hands-on and meeting as many people as possible, being a very personable king. Clearly security perhaps is going to be a concern considering the egg incidents we've had in the United Kingdom, but security here is pretty tight, Mark.
I'm just picking up strains of Goldfinger. The band is playing the James Bond theme, which is rather interesting. However, there we are. We have the royal couple waiting to come down those steps. And just to touch on another issue, Cameron, of course, we just had the tribute being paid by the Queen Consort to Paul O'Grady, who she was great friends with, and saying she was deeply saddened by his passing. And in terms of the royal couple, they are, should we say, a very human sort of duo in terms of their sensitivity and, as we will perhaps see in the coming hours, the ability to greet and meet people. I think we might have lost Cameron there. So they are just, I think, waiting for the cannons to be fired there. There may be a couple of more shots.
Hello, Mark. Can you still hear me?
Yes, the cannon shot, cannon fire beat you to it for a moment there. I was just saying also we had these strains of Goldfinger coming through from the band, which is an interesting choice. And now we have a fly past as well.
Yes, we will. Lots of British tunes are playing, and we are expecting a fly past as well. You mentioned just a short while ago about the Queen Consort's tributes to television star Paul O'Grady. And from my understanding, the Queen Consort is actually going to be making contact with Paul O'Grady's family privately to pay her personal condolences and respects to her. And obviously, as we've heard from palace sources, she is deeply saddened because it was this year that they both celebrated together the 160th anniversary of Battersea Dogs and Cats Home. The Queen Consort is their longtime patron, and Paul O'Grady was their ambassador. And Paul O'Grady had a TV show for the love of dogs, which the Queen Consort took part in. We believe that is going to re-air today in tribute to Paul O'Grady. So, yes, a very sad shock, really, for the Queen Consort for losing a man she grew perhaps close to in recent years. But as with everything when it comes to the royal family, they have to keep calm and carry on. And that is why the King and Queen Consorts have arrived in Berlin and will be getting on with their official duties as working members of the royal family.
Well, the James Bond theme now beating out. I wonder whether King Charles was feeling perhaps he should have abseiled into the airfield like, of course, his late mother did on the Olympic Stadium in London. But we now have... Yeah, it's still playing. Whether he can walk in step to the James Bond theme coming down the stairs, I don't... A bit of a strange choice, isn't it, Cameron, for the official arrival?
I think this is called filling time, Mark. The King and Queen Consort have arrived in Berlin, and they seem to just be entertaining the crowds at the moment. But we were here a little bit earlier, and there was actually a rehearsal going on for the big military procession and military walkthrough, which the King will be taking part in a little bit later on. I don't know if you can see from one of your camera shots, and for those listening on radio, there is a big red carpet that has been rolled out in front of the Brandenburg Gate, and the King is expected to walk down that line inspecting the German military with the President of Germany as well, and of course a fly past, as you mentioned. So a big ceremonial welcome. As I said, it's the first time that any head of state anywhere in the world has had a ceremonial welcome here at the Brandenburg Gate, perhaps showing the significance of this visit. But they seem to be very much literally rolling out the red carpet and welcoming the British head of state and his consorts. The first time since 2015 the British head of state has been in in Germany, and of course the first post-Brexit as well. So I think the British government and British officials will very much be hoping this is going to strengthen relations and be the King's power of soft diplomacy in action in terms of promoting British interests on the world stage.
And an interesting point you pick up there, of course, because King Charles acknowledged that when he became the sovereign rather than being a prince, he would have to change his political stance. But there is still a very important role for the monarchy to play, particularly with, I guess, what we've seen in terms of European relations in these past 5 years.
Oh, absolutely. I think we can see from the programme of engagements the King and Queen Consort have that it's very much reflecting their interests. The Queen Consort, as we understand it, is perhaps visiting a school. Maybe that will be to do with children's literacy. Of course, she is very passionate about and feels that if children start reading young, it will really help their future prospects later on in life. For the King, there's lots on sustainability and climate change. And I think it's going to be very interesting, Mark, what he's going to be talking about in the German Bundestag tomorrow, the German Parliament, because he has addressed that Parliament before, but as Prince of Wales. So he's clearly got to be very careful tomorrow because he is addressing the German Parliament as head of state, as the British head of state, and he can't be drawn too much into politics. So it's a very fine line, I think, for the King, but he'll be well aware of that, as will his staff.
Well, they're on board the Bentley now, which you're reflecting has a German engine, of course, but you were telling us that there will be a trip on public transport there as well, which has been suffering a few problems with strikes and so on in Germany.
Yes, it certainly has. We're hoping it's all going to be ironed out by the time that happens. I can't go into too much details as to exactly what the King is going to be doing in terms of public transport yet. However, climate change and sustainability is perhaps very much the theme of that one. What I can tell you is the King is going to be visiting Berlin here today and tomorrow, and he will then be travelling on to Hamburg. He's also going to be, there's going to be a lot of, let's say, reconciliation perhaps for Germany and the UK. He's going to be visiting a church which was bombed in Hamburg, which was bombed by the Allies during the Second World War. And similar to Coventry Cathedral, perhaps in the UK, they left those ruins there as a monument perhaps to the civilians and people who have lost their lives during the Second World War, and the King is expected to lay a wreath there, and perhaps again it's that bringing together of the two nations despite our history and our strengthening of relationships.
Yes, of course, the firebombing of Hamburg and Dresden causing huge losses. But you're pointing out that he's going to be the first to be addressing the Bundestag. We understand that he may deliver the speech both in English and in German.
Yes, that's our understanding. We're not sure if the King speaks fluent German. He does speak fluent French, which clearly was cancelled due to those protests in France over pension reforms. But yes, that is the rumour. It's not been confirmed by Buckingham Palace, but we are expecting him to say a few words in German, as would be expected, as he is visiting as the head of state, which is being hosted by Germany as the host nation. He's obviously also got the state banquet tonight at the presidential palace, hosted by the German president and his wife, and there is going to be a toast happening just before the banquet starts, and a few words will be said there, and we do expect that King Charles will be saying a few words in German both at that occasion and perhaps in the German Parliament tomorrow as well.
Yeah, and have we got any indication what the crowds are likely to be, especially there in Berlin at the Brandenburg Gate and so on? Is it a big story in Germany at the moment?
It appears to be, Mark. When we arrived roughly an hour ago, the crowds were already queuing to get to the crash barriers, which surrounds the whole square, if you like, around the Brandenburg Gate. There is kind of two sections, perhaps of security reasons. There are those members of the public which have been specially invited, so British Embassy staff, Royal British Legion, and so on. They are in one section, perhaps those closest to where the King is going to be. But there are, you know, ordinary members of the public who are clearly quite desperate to catch a glimpse of the King and Queen consorts. The British royal family clearly has global appeal, and they are famous around the world. There are many people wearing actually cardboard crowns as we get close to the coronation, and there are German fans who have travelled here to catch a glimpse of the King and Queen consorts and perhaps try and meet them when they do their what's called walkabouts, where the King and Queen consorts wander up and down the crowd and speaking to ordinary members of the public. They don't have too long to wait because, as you said, the King and Queen consorts have entered their cars at the airport, and it's not too long a drive to the Brandenburg Gate here in central Berlin.
And in terms of the rest of the visit, you were pointing out they will be meeting these military units, of course, and given what's been happening in Ukraine, it's brought a sort of reassessment of whether we are still at the tail end of that Cold War.
Yes, it certainly is. The King is not the King's first engagements to do with Ukraine by any stretch of the imagination. When he was still the Prince of Wales and the Queen Consort was Duchess of Cornwall, they visited the Ukrainian Orthodox Church in London, where the Queen Consort was actually at one point brought to tears by the choir that was singing. That was very soon after the Russian invasion. There has been a number of engagements since then. The King viewed British personnel and Ukrainian soldiers who had come across to Britain to be trained by British personnel before going back to then defend their territory. So the King met some of them a month or two ago, and then here in Germany, the King is going to be meeting both British and German personnel who are working together on joint military exercises. That's going to be in Brandenburg, which is a town just outside of Germany, obviously named after, the gate named after the town. Something to do with bridge building and something like that. So he's going to be meeting them and viewing a military exercise, and of course meeting Ukrainian refugees. A number of thousands of Ukrainian refugees have settled in Germany since that war began.
I have got perhaps something that might help us. A joint German-British engineer battalion, the Amphibious Engineer Battalion 130, reconstituted 18 months ago, and they'll be laying a pontoon bridge over the Oder-Havel Canal north of Berlin. So there we are. That's going to be a very exciting event for the cameras to follow. But just in terms of the security operation, of course, given what we saw in France, I think they've got about 1,100 police there to line the streets of Berlin as well. Still some concerns.
Absolutely, there is a heavy police presence here in Berlin. As we have mentioned, the French part of this state visit was postponed at request of the French government following those protests over pension reforms, some of which did turn violent, and there was many fires in both Paris and Bordeaux, where the King and Queen Consorts were expected to be. In terms of Berlin and in Germany and Hamburg, there are no such protests over pension reforms, so it was deemed safe enough for the King and Queen Consorts to be here. There is a heavy police presence. Clearly, there's going to be a heavy security operations. These kind of state visits are planned months in advance, so every detail is thought through, and hopefully all the choreography, if you like, that goes with a state visit goes without a hitch. And there is, as I said, big security presence here. So that is very much perhaps what both British and German officials are hoping for, a smooth ride, despite the hurdles at the beginning with the postponement of the French part, and also perhaps a distraction in London to do with the King's youngest son.
Indeed. We hadn't mentioned that at all, which is just as well, maybe. Cameron, for the moment in Berlin, thank you. We'll let you get in position, ready, of course, for their arrival at that Brandenburg Gate fairly imminently. And we'll update you, of course, on that royal visit, but also we'll be updating you on the government plans that have been unveiled in the Commons with Robert Jenrick on two bases, at least, RAF Scampton and RAF Wethersfield, that will house asylum seekers. Scampton, of course, being the home of the dam busters and the RAF base there, but perhaps we won't mention that too loudly with a state visit to Germany. However, all that coming up for you in a moment. Stay with us.
I joined GB News because I was sick and tired of not hearing my views being represented, not just mine, but so many people that I knew and spoke to.
I just couldn't get my voice out there. I couldn't say anything. I couldn't do anything. Whatever the narrative was, I kind of had to follow it.
GB News is there to provide a voice for those who have been ignored by the establishment media. We think different things. We've got a different style.
GB News is here to be optimistic and positive about the future.
It's real kind of dynamic and flowing, with the audience very much at the heart of it, like a big family.
Here at GB News, we talk about the things that matter to you.
Hearing the voices from right across our towns and cities, especially our towns.
All sides of the argument represented with a heavy dose of opinion.
We're on a mission here to make a difference.
And the GB News family really is here for you, and whatever time of day you can watch or listen.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
You've probably seen politicians interviewed 1,000 times, but we do it differently. We find out who they really are, we don't shout, we chat, and hopefully we bring a bit of light, not just heat.
Did you know, Kate Moss? Apparently.
Do you have a pair of jeans or a pair of jeans?
No, of course I don't. What would I do with them?
My friends are like, oh my God, what's she doing now?
Join me every Sunday at 6 for Gloria Meets, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, the Member of Parliament for North East Somerset and a former government minister. For years, I've walked the corridors of power in both Westminster and the City of London. I campaigned in the largest democratic vote in our island story. I know this country has so much to be proud of. We need to have the arguments, the discussions on how we make it better. The wisdom of the nation is in its people. Vox Populi, Vox Dei. That's why I'm joining the People's Channel. Join me Monday to Thursday at 8 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Our authorities, our communities doing all they can to combat violent crime. With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
And welcome back to GB News Live. Just to update you that we'll head back to Berlin to keep you updated, of course, on the King's state visit with the Queen Consort. Having arrived now in Berlin, they'll be heading to the Brandenburg Gate. More with Cameron Walker, our royal correspondent, shortly. But let's now just update you on a very important survey on the state of the NHS, with public satisfaction of the health service dropping to its lowest ever level, according to this major new survey. Dissatisfaction across the UK doubling in the last 2 years as people struggle to access services, believing there are not enough staff to deliver what they call high-quality care. Well, joining us now is Jack Carson, our East Midlands correspondent, who's at Walsall Manor Hospital. And Jack, interesting that the report's author indicating the public do not want, he said, a different model of healthcare. They just want the current model to work.
That's right. This is the interesting thing about this survey, isn't it? The majority of people are extremely satisfied with the way in which the NHS works, the fact that it's free at the point of use as well. When you look at some of the things that people were satisfied at within the actual survey, the fact that it's free at point of use, the fact that they offer half quality of care provided is to their standard, but the overall satisfaction levels coming out from this survey means that the NHS satisfaction levels for the UK stands at 29%. 7 percentage points in the last year. It's the lowest it's kind of ever been. And when you look at the levels of satisfaction within the NHS just over a decade ago in 2010, it stood then at 71%. So a dramatic drop in how satisfied people are with the NHS. And when you look at where some of those dissatisfactions come from, you are looking at things like long waiting times for GP appointments and for hospital appointments. 69% of people chose that as their main reason for dissatisfaction. And as I mentioned, of course, as well as things like services, inpatient hospital services as well as A&E being one of the things that people aren't particularly happy with. Responding to these results this morning, Matthew Taylor, who's the Chief Executive of the NHS Confederation, said the survey results should be a red flag for the government and shows that this is a sign rather that the NHS is not being given what it needs to fully deliver for its local communities. And of course, in Prime Minister's questions as well, Dominic Raab, standing in for Rishi Sunak today, did face a question about a GP surgery in his own constituency, with him responding, saying that we've seen a large increase in GP appointments, with over 29 million carried out since the start of the year, and that the government are improving access to general practice with more staff, and that there's a record number of trainee GPs, and the government are investing £1.5 billion to create more jobs. Of course, we know the fact that lots of nurses in England have been on strike over the past months, and have obviously now come to a table to vote on that deal to end the strikes. But the fact is, despite Brits being unhappy, they are still, as you mentioned, happy with the model of the NHS.
Yeah, and in terms of what the government's planning to do, of course, it's being suggested now that Jeremy Hunt may pump an extra $3 billion into the health service to fund any pay deals. Steve Barclay wanting it basically to be fresh funding rather than moved from elsewhere. But clearly, as we've heard from, well, the junior doctors and the nurses, it's about the structural problems as well, the staffing as well as the pay.
Well, that's right. You know, this dissatisfaction in some of the care that's been delivered, the nurses will tell you it's because there's not enough staff on the wards in order to provide enough care for each patient, and that they are outstretched. And according to a survey of more than 2,500 people from Organise, the part of the union there, they say that actually 80% of NHS staff are considering quitting because of those stress levels, that they feel burnt out. And so that money that the government is pumping in needs to not come from existing budgets, but needs to be an additional one from the view of the nurses in order to provide and increase those levels on the wards, to provide the care and bring those satisfaction levels back up.
Jack, thanks very much indeed for updating us there in Walsall. Of course, we'll see what the further reaction is. Thank you very much indeed. Now, let's bring you some breaking news where the jury in the trial of the man accused of murdering 9-year-old Olivia Pratt-Corbell has retired to consider its verdict. Thomas Cashman, who's 34, accused of firing a fatal shot into a home at Dovecot in Liverpool in August last year. He denies all charges, but will have more from Manchester Crown Court as that jury comes back with a decision. Also, we'll be reflecting more on the government's announcement on migrant housing plans. Robert Jenrick outlining those in the Commons earlier, with 2 RAF bases and another civil location at Bexhill in East Sussex being earmarked. More details coming up shortly, but let's get an update now on all the other headlines with Ray.
Thanks, Mark. 31 minutes past 1. I'm Ray Addison in the GB newsroom. The Immigration Minister has announced plans to stop housing asylum seekers in hotels and instead place them in disused military bases. Admitting that the use of hotels has, quote, harmed some towns, Robert Jenrick said migrants will now be placed in sites in Essex, Lincolnshire and East Sussex. The accommodation will be guarded by 24-hour security and meet migrants' essential living needs and nothing more, he says. As an incentive to local councils, the government will also provide a new funding package to accept refugees.
These hotels take valuable assets from communities and place pressures on local public services. Seaside towns have lost tourist trade, weddings have been cancelled, and local councils have had their resources diverted to manage them. And the hard-working British taxpayer has been left to foot the eye-watering £2.3 billion a year bill. Madam Deputy Speaker, we must not elevate the well-being of illegal migrants above those of the British people.
Well, Angela Rayner has called on Dominic Raab to resign, saying he's failed to protect women and girls from rape and sexual assault. The Deputy Labour leader accused the Justice Secretary of bringing the criminal justice system to its knees, with only 1.6% of predators being charged. It comes as the government announced parole reforms to make sure that murderers, terrorists and child killers spend more time behind bars. Ms Rayner accused Mr Raab of leaving the door open to antisocial behaviour due to a lack of neighbourhood policing.
The way things are going, and reports are to be believed, this might be your last PMQs. So let's look at the highlights. A criminal justice on its knees, the largest court backlog on record, rape victims waiting for justice, and through it all, he managed to rack up 24 formal complaints from his own civil servants. So can he say today, will he walk before he's pushed?
Let me tell the Right Honourable Lady what we've been doing, what I've been doing this week. We've delivered new legislation to support the victims of crime, including rape, and to protect the public. We've delivered a plan to stamp out antisocial behaviour, and we've supported families with their energy bills. What's she done? What have the Labour front bench done? They tried to block our small boats bill, and that's the difference between them and us. We deliver for Britain. She likes to play her political games.
And the King and Queen Consort have arrived in Germany for their state visit. They're both expected to receive military honours at the Brandenburg Gate in Berlin, followed by a state banquet hosted by Germany's president. It's Charles and Camilla's first foreign visit as heads of the royal family for the King's 29th trip to Germany. The pair were previously scheduled to visit France this week, but the trip was postponed due to nationwide protests over pension reform. We're on TV, online, on DAB+ radio and, of course, on TuneIn. This is GB News. Back to Mark in just a moment.
You've probably seen politicians interviewed 1,000 times, but we do it differently. We find out who they really are, we don't shout, we chat, and hopefully we bring a bit of light, not just heat. Did you know Kate Moss?
Apparently.
Do you have a pair of jeans or a pair of jeans?
No, of course I don't. What would I do with them?
My friends are like, oh my God, what's she doing now?
Join me every Sunday at 6 for Gloria Meets, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, the Member of Parliament for North East Somerset and a former government minister. For years, I've walked the corridors of power in both Westminster and the City of London. I campaigned in the largest democratic vote in our island story. I know this country has so much to be proud of. We need to have the arguments, the discussions on how we make it better. The wisdom of the nation is in its people. Vox Populi, Vox Dei. That's why I'm joining the People's Channel. Join me Monday to Thursday at 8 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Here on GB News Live, we'll be keeping you in the picture, finding out what's happening across the country and finding out why it matters to you. We'll have the facts fast with our team of reporters and specialist correspondents. Wherever it's happening, we'll be there from 12 noon on TV, radio and online. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my two comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michael Portillo. Join me on GB News on a Sunday morning for topical discussion, debate, arts and culture, and sometimes even ethical dilemmas.
I don't always agree with you, Michael.
Michael Portillo, Sundays on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
And welcome back to GB News Live. Now, in this past hour, the Immigration Minister, Robert Jenrick, has announced that the government will use former military sites in Essex, Lincolnshire and East Sussex to house migrants. A Home Office source also confirming to GB News that one of those sites, the one in East Sussex at Bexhill, on private land, but one of them at RAF Scampton, of course, which is the home to the dam busters. A bit more detail just coming in because Mr Jenrick had been replying to a question from the former Conservative Minister Edward Lee, who's the constituency MP. Robert Jenrick saying there will be significant package of support for the area around RAF Scampton, basically saying, while this policy is without question in the national interest, we understand the impact and concern there will be within local communities. In terms of Scampton, Mr Jenrick saying we do not intend to make any use of the historic buildings, involving, of course, the dam busters and the planes, the Lancasters and so on. And indeed, our temporary use of the site to ensure that those heritage assets are, in fact, enhanced and preserved. We do see this as a short-term arrangement. We would like to enter into an agreement, as he knows, with West Lindsey District Council so they can take possession of the site at a later date and their regeneration plans can be realised in due course. So that is literally coming in from the Commons now. Well, let's go live to Scampton. Our reporter, Will Hollis, is there for us. So, Will, the government clearly taking a little time and effort now to actually try to reassure people there.
Yeah, of course. Well, this has been big news for the last couple of weeks, including on GB News. Nigel Farage was down here at the Dam Busters in earlier this week, and somebody else who's here quite often is Pete, who's been following this really closely. Pete, we've been watching Robert Jenrick, the Immigrations Minister, in the House of Commons. He's basically saying this is going ahead at Scampton as well as 3 other places, but he's going to be supporting the area, supporting West Lindsey, and so when this is all sorted, maybe Scampton is going to be in a better position for the heritage future, which is what we've been hearing about. What's your reaction? Because this is the thing that everybody in this pub is talking about.
I've been having my lunch. My wife just texted me to say the decision's been taken to use Scampton. What a disaster. That was her words, right? And having found out what had been planned for the RAF station, what West Lindsey have worked really hard for, got them £300 million for, and this is like an exocet for it. Right? I do not believe what the honourable gentleman is saying at all, right? Because it'll not happen. It's a disaster. It's just doesn't make sense. Whichever way you look at it, from whoever's perspective you look at it, it does not make sense. I went to the meeting last week because I didn't know a lot about what had gone on, what was going on, and I learned a lot. And I was really pleased with what West Lindsey had done, and then to find that because of just the rumour of it coming here, the developer has walked away, and it's just not benefiting anybody. It doesn't better the asylum seekers. They will have absolutely nothing to do, right? They will outnumber the people who live up on the station by over 2 to 1.
Just describe for me, what is Scampton like? Obviously there's a massive RAF base here where the Dam Busters raids went from in the 1940s, but what's Scampton like now as a village for the people that do live here?
It's a lovely place to live, right? Scampton is such a well-known place because of its history, because of its heritage, and we don't want to lose that. You know, there are some private houses now on the station, right, and they're just building that up. They've got a lovely school up there, and now that's all thrown into confusion, you know, and for no reason. It does not make sense. I feel sorry. I feel sympathetic towards the asylum seekers, right? When I went to the meeting, I didn't go up there as a NIMBY, right? I wanted to find out what their conditions would be like and that sort of thing.
NIMBY being not in my backyard, which is what we often hear. I think one of the main things that we're hearing about from the government is that they want to get people out of these hotels where it's costing £6.2 million every single day. But is this the way, whether it's RAF bases or army bases here in Lincolnshire or elsewhere in the country?
I do not believe it's the way at all, because it doesn't benefit anybody. Right? If I was an asylum seeker, I would not want to be stuck on a runway in a transport container, is what this sounds like, these Greek-style accommodation they call it, you know, out in the middle of nowhere, right? We're 5 miles from Lincoln. There's one shop on the camp, right? It just doesn't make sense. They'd be fed up, right? And of course that's when mischief can occur. But you know, I'm looking at it from their perspective. I would not want to be up there, right? There are better places. Okay, hotels might be expensive. It's not going to be cheap to live up there neither, right? So there's got to be another solution. But to say that the government maintain they're trying to level up, right? And we were trying to get we had got some money set aside for turning the station into a heritage centre, which I really look forward to. Create some skills, create some jobs, you know, benefit the country, benefit the economy, and now they've just scuppered it completely in one foul swoop. They're not listening to people. They're not listening to people.
This is temporary, they say. We don't have any sorts of numbers for how long. We have an idea that it's probably going to be 1,500 or so people here at RAF Scampton. Of course, you're just one voice, although the community is clearly quite strong about this. What do you think the rest of the community is going to be thinking right now, and what do you think the next step for the community might be when you're faced against a government that ultimately makes all the big decisions unless you're to take them to court?
Well, then what can you do? I don't think unless you go and demonstrate, but they've already made up their mind. I think they made up their mind a long time ago, to be honest. So I don't think there's anything we can do. I'd like somebody to give me a definition of temporary, right? Because I've known temporary systems to go on for 10 years or more, right? At the end of the day, the government's got to get their fingers out of their bums, right, to get the processing done. That's why we've got this problem, because they can't get the asylum seekers processed.
And it is going to be a long process. I think that's why Robert Jemrick uses the term temporary. Pete, thank you so much. Thank you for coming over as well when you're having a meal and a drink with your friends in the pub. It does seem to be the thing that everybody's talking about here at the Dam Busters pub. I have heard a few opposing views, people that are say, welcome these people. Let's make sure that we can sort out this problem, because most people agree, no matter what, that there is a big problem going on right now in the immigration system.
Will, thank you very much indeed for updating us there at Scampton, and I think perhaps we can update you there in Scampton here at GB News at the news desk, because we're being told that Sir Edward Lee, who is the local MP for that area, Conservative former minister, of course, has told Robert Jenrick in the Commons, this is the quote, "I can inform him that the moment this is confirmed, the local authority, West Lindsey, will issue an immediate judicial review and injunction against this thoroughly bad decision, which is not based on good governance, but the politics of trying to do something." So we will try and ascertain from West Lindsey what the situation is, the local authority there at Scampton. But Sir Edward Lee indicating that the judicial review and injunction will go ahead to try and stop Scampton being made into one of these centres. More on that as we get it. But let's reflect now on television presenter and comedian Paul O'Grady, who's died suddenly at the age of 67. In a statement, his partner had said, "It's with great sadness I inform you that Paul has passed away unexpectedly but peacefully." Well, during his career, the entertainer known for his first drag persona, Lily Savage, as well as then going on to host his own programme, The Paul O'Grady Show, Blind Date, of course, taking over from his great mate, Cilla Black, and then Blankety Blank, from which he won numerous accolades, including a TV BAFTA and a National Television Award. Also, of course, as we know, a long-time advocate for animals, hosting the ITV multi-award-winning series For the Love of Dogs, and also acting as an ambassador for Battersea Dogs and Cats Home. Well, joining us now, Dawn Neeson, former editor of the Daily Star, and, of course, a regular here on GB News. And great sadness being expressed, Dawn, but also great love for him from the Queen Consort and even those at Battersea Dogs Home.
Yeah, absolutely. Good afternoon, Mark. It's, I mean, the very sad news that we woke up to this morning, that we'd lost Paul yesterday evening, hopefully peacefully. It's one of those celebrity deaths where it actually hits you. You know, it's so easy to go, "Oh, right, I'm very sorry," etc., etc. But I think Paul did touch so many lives, because, you know what, Mark, he was genuinely one of the good guys in the industry. I first interviewed Paul, 28 years ago now, back in 1995. I spent the morning in bed with him, actually. He was presenting on the Big Breakfast show on Channel 4. He'd taken over from Paula Yates, and he was in the character of Lily Savage, and he was conducting the interviews in bed, as he did. And I had the job of, for a tabloid, which automatically made people usually quite nervous, I had the job of going spending the day with him and just seeing what it was like, a day in the life of Paul / Lily on the Big Breakfast. And, you know, a tabloid instantly make people nervous. But you know what? He was absolutely a sweetheart, Mark. We spent the day on the bed bonding over hair, makeup and fishnet tights. He had better legs and did better makeup than me. And you know what? Afterwards, I went round all the crew and the people that worked on the site, just seeing what they thought of him. And normally, sort of like people, you know, people are a bit, "Oh, it wasn't that great." But there wasn't a bad word about him, Mark. Everybody loved him. And what is amazing today is all the tributes, many, many tributes come in today, paying tribute to Paul. There isn't a bad word. Not one single person had a bad word to say about him. And I think that says more about the man than any of us ever can, to be honest with you.
And I think
as I said, when the
Yeah, I was going to say great sadness. Yeah, great sadness that he lost his Radio 2 programme, where, of course, he was a great favourite on the Sunday. And I'm just looking at what Malcolm Prince, his producer, of course, who did the double act with him on Radio 2, saying he'd seen him yesterday and he was laughing, smiling and full of life, which I guess is the way to go out, isn't it, really?
Of course it is, Mark, and that's why it was such a shock. He hadn't been, obviously he'd had heart issues in the past, a couple of heart attacks. And, he wasn't shy of having a party. He liked to sing in, he liked to drink. And I think that's what people liked about him more. He was real. He was like us. He was fallible. But he seemed so fine. And so, a friend of mine lives in the village down the road was saying he was out walking his dogs. He was absolutely... You wouldn't have known that this was going to happen. And all you can do is hope that it was a very peaceful passing. Obviously, he had his husband with him and they had a brilliant relationship. And obviously surrounded by the animals he loved. And Mark, if there was one truism in life that, he loved animals, obviously, and if animals love you back, then you must be a person worth loving.
Good point. Dawn, thank you very much for joining us and bringing us your tribute and your admission of spending the morning in bed with Lily Savage. Not many people can... Yeah, there we go. Thank you very much indeed. See you soon. Now, let's take you back to Berlin. The King and Queen Consort are arriving at the Brandenburg Gate imminently. That is the Band and the Guard of Honour getting ready. We'll see what musical selection this time, because we had Goldfinger and the James Bond theme at the airport as the RAF plane touched down and taxied. And there is the Brandenburg Gate, of course, that iconic Berlin landmark, which saw on the night of unification both East and West Germany come back together again as this new modern nation. And in terms of the military presence, as we see those sailors there, of course, the great debate that's gone on in Germany about what they should do in terms of helping Europe and giving aid to Ukraine following the invasion of Russia. And Olaf Scholz has been trying to wrestle with that. But we have there the Union flag about, I think, to go up the flagpole. And we saw the Royal Standard flying earlier on the aircraft arriving, because this is the King's first state visit. It was due to start in France, but that was postponed because of the problems in Paris and the protests. But this tour and this visit are very important too for Germany, because it is the first ceremonial visit. Cameron, our Royal correspondent, is there about to witness these scenes. Cameron, just describe for us how many people are there to witness and watch this.
Are a good 300-500 people throughout the square here in Berlin, and it's a mixture of people really. We have members of the public from Germany, but there's also German schools have been invited, members of the Royal British Legion, the British Embassy staff and their families as well. As you mentioned, Mark, it's the ceremonial welcome here at the Brandenburg Gates. It's the first time ever any head of state has received a ceremonial welcome here by the German president. So I think that just shows perhaps the significance of this event that's going to be happening here very shortly. Right. As you can probably see on your screens if you're watching on television, the Union flag is about to be raised on the flagpole, and there's the Military Guard of Honour, which again you can see both national anthems are going to be playing a little bit later on when the King has arrived, and then His Majesty is expected to walk along the Guard of Honour with the President and pause at the flags, and both the King and Queen Consort are expected to meet the crowds who have gathered here. The Queen Consort's also expected to meet a children's choir, as well as members of activity groups for elderly people, some of which were involved actually in the King and Queen Consort's last visits to Berlin when they were still Prince of Wales and Duchess of Cornwall. But the Brandenburg Gate is perhaps pretty significant here because it's seen as kind of a memorial of division after the Berlin Wall was constructed, and obviously it was located then in the restricted area. But fast forward 40 years when the Berlin Wall collapsed, the unification, as you talked about, Mark, it's kind of now a symbol of the fact that the ceremonial welcome is happening here. I think British officials and German officials want this very much to be a symbol of unity in Europe, and as one of our closest members, Britain and Germany.
OK, Cameron, thank you for that. Back to you in a moment when the King and Queen Consort arrive. But let's take you from Berlin, to the end of the universe, or at least 2.7 billion light years away. Because an ultramassive black hole, 33 billion times the mass of the Sun, has been discovered by astronomers in the UK. There it is. And that is, yes, a black hole. Well, scientists from Durham University said this is the biggest ever found. The team describing their findings, published in the journal Monthly Notices of the Royal Astronomical Society, as extremely exciting. Well, joining us now, Dr. James Nightingale, I'm glad to say, who actually led the study, the lead author. Thank you very much indeed for joining us, James. I have to ask you, and I guess my head's going to hurt over this, what's the difference between a black hole and an ultra-massive black hole?
Yeah, so a ultramassive black hole is reserved for the biggest black holes we've ever found in the universe. So the strict definition would be a black hole which is over 10 billion times the mass of the Sun. And indeed, as you said, the one we found is over 30 billion times the mass of the Sun. So the majority of black holes in the universe are much smaller than that, albeit still obviously extremely large. But yeah, an ultramassive black hole is the biggest of the biggest, pretty much the biggest things you could ever find in the universe.
Yeah, it looks like the plug hole at the end of the universe, the pictures we're seeing at the moment. And I think you've used what's called gravitational lensing and all your supercomputer simulators to actually measure it.
Yep, so we use a technique called gravitational lensing. This is basically where, when light is emitted from distant galaxies at the end of the universe, that light travels across the universe. And if it encounters other galaxies, other mass on its traversal through the universe, it's actually pulled towards those galaxies by their gravitational field. So we see that you can see this here, we can see that the light of distant galaxies is bent towards large overdensities of mass in the universe. And so in this particular study, we were so lucky that we found a galaxy whose light was just 40 million times the distance between the Sun and the Earth to a black hole, which meant that we could see that its light must have been extremely distorted and extremely bent by this ultramassive black hole.
OK. And excuse my ignorance, but if you go into that black hole, is that the end of it? We don't actually know what lies the other side? Because, I mean, some people suggest it might be a portal or a gate to another universe.
Yeah, so obviously people refer to black holes as singularities. There is a point where if you get so close to a black hole, you could never come out. Light could never come out. So as you say, once you cross what's called the event horizon, once you cross that point, you know, we have no comprehension of what would be there. It's impossible for us as humans to observe what's on the other side of one of these black holes. So yeah, it's the realm of science fiction to speculate if it's a portal to another world, or something else entirely.
So we can measure the mass, we can measure where it is, but we don't know what's on the other side of the hole.
Yeah, like there's a point where nothing can escape, no light can escape, information can't escape. If nothing can get out, then it's completely impossible for us as humans to understand what's inside.
Yeah, but we can obviously think and work on the physics to see what we might be able to get in the years ahead. But as you say, very exciting, and we're very glad that you're able to join us and explain its importance. Dr. James Nightingale and your team there at Durham University, thank you very much indeed. Well, from the end of the universe, back to Berlin shortly. We'll have the latest on the King and Queen Consort's visit. Stay with us here on GB News Live.
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Dubes & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Jacob Rees-Mogg. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by Headliners. On TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, Nana, stop arguing. I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion. People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment.
I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different.
Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics, and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
It's 2 o'clock. You're watching GB News Live with me, Mark Longhurst. A very good afternoon to you. And coming up, we're going to be heading back to Germany because we have the historic first state visit for King Charles and the Queen Consort commencing with their arrival in Berlin. Shortly, they're expected to arrive at the Brandenburg Gate, that iconic image of Berlin. And we'll have the latest with Cameron Walker, our royal correspondent there. But first, let's update you on all the headlines with Ray.
Thanks, Mark. Good afternoon. It's 1 minute past 2. Here's the latest. The Immigration Minister has announced plans to stop housing asylum seekers in hotels and instead place them in disused military bases. Admitting that the use of hotels has harmed some towns, Robert Jenrick said migrants will now be placed in sites in Essex, Lincolnshire and East Sussex. The accommodation will be guarded by 24-hour security and meet migrants' quote, essential living needs and nothing more. As an incentive to local councils, the government will provide a new funding package to accept refugees.
These hotels take valuable assets from communities and place pressures on local public services. Seaside towns have lost tourist trade, weddings have been cancelled, and local councils have had their resources diverted to manage them. And the hard-working British taxpayer has been left to foot the eye-watering £2.3 billion a year bill. Madam Deputy Speaker, we must not elevate the well-being of illegal migrants above those of the British people.
Well, Angela Rayner has called on Dominic Raab to resign, saying he's failed to protect women and girls from rape and sexual assault. The Deputy Labour leader accused the Justice Secretary of bringing the criminal justice system to its knees, with only 1.6% of predators being charged. It comes as the government announced parole reforms to make sure that murderers, terrorists and child killers spend more time behind bars. Ms Rayner accused Mr Raab of leaving the door open to antisocial behaviour due to a lack of neighbourhood policing.
The way things are going, and reports are to be believed, this might be your last PMQs. So let's look at the highlights. A criminal justice on its knees, the largest court backlog on record, rape victims waiting for justice, and through it all, he managed to rack up 24 formal complaints from his own civil servants. So can he say today, will he walk before he's pushed?
Let me tell the Right Honourable Lady what we've been doing, what I've been doing this week. We've delivered new legislation to support the victims of crime, including rape, and to protect the public. We've delivered a plan to stamp out antisocial behaviour, and we've supported families with their energy bills. What's she done? What have the Labour front bench done? They tried to block our small boats bill, and that's the difference between them and us. We deliver for Britain. She likes to play her political games.
Well, the Chancellor has been facing questions by the Treasury Select Committee over his spring budget. Jeremy Hunt says the unexpected increase in inflation last month shows there can be no complacency about rising prices. When asked about the mini-budget, which caused market chaos, he said wrong decisions had been made.
There were some mistakes in the mini-budget which we had to reverse. In particular, I think it's clear you can't fund tax cuts through increased borrowing. So that is a clear thing that we changed course on.
The General Secretary of Unison has told GB News if their members reject the government's latest pay offer, strikes will continue. Speaking exclusively to Gloria De Piero, Christina McAney said all workers will all walk out. And you can watch the full interview here on GB News on Sunday at 6 p.m. OK, let's cross over now to Berlin. Or rather, we're not going to do that, rather. Let's carry on with our next item, which is the jury in the trial of the murder of 9-year-old Olivia Pratt-Corbell has gone out to deliberate. 34-year-old Thomas Cashman has been accused of shooting the schoolgirl in her home in Liverpool last August. Her mother was also injured. Cashman says at the time of the shooting he was at a friend's house counting £10,000 in cash and smoking cannabis. He denies all of the allegations. Mourners, including the Prime Minister and Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer, gathered inside the church to pay their last respects to Baroness Betty Boothroyd. The former Labour MP died last month, aged 93. She was the first and only woman so far to be elected Speaker of the House of Commons. The Liberal Democrats have launched their local election campaign by accusing the Conservative Party of crashing the UK economy. Speaking in Hemel Hempstead, Sir Ed Davies said the Tories were out of excuses and should be out of government. The Lib Dem leader said lifelong Conservatives are saying they'll never vote for the party again. And the King and Queen Consort have arrived in Germany for their state visit. They're both expected to receive military honours at the Brandenburg Gate in Berlin, followed by a state banquet hosted by Germany's president. It's Charles and Camilla's first foreign visit as heads of the royal family, but the King's 29th trip to Germany. The pair were previously scheduled to visit France this week, but the trip was postponed due to nationwide protests over pension reforms. This is GB News. We'll bring you more as it happens. Now let's get back to Mark.
Ray, thank you very much indeed. But we can now head back to Berlin. A little bit of delay from the King and Queen Consort arriving at the Brandenburg Gate. We saw them earlier, of course, at the airport. We can tell you that their official Twitter account has said it's a great joy to be able to develop the long-standing friendship between the two nations. That said, after they arrived on board an RAF Voyager and greeted by a 21-gun salute and a flypast by 2 Typhoon jets, and then as a mark of respect, they had the various flags flying and James Bond music as well. I think it was Goldfinger as they were waiting at the top of the steps to head down onto the tarmac. But this is now the scene at the Brandenburg Gate where the German officials are waiting to greet the King and Queen Consort, because it is, as we were reflecting, a state visit, and this is the first time that we've had such a ceremonial welcome at the Brandenburg Gate. And indications that with the German president there attending this official dinner tonight. We've got the British ambassador to Germany, Jill Gallard, and State Secretary Dorte Dinger. But the red carpet being rolled out there just near to the Brandenburg Gate. Of course, very symbolic, iconic part of the Berlin skyline, which saw the night of unification, both East and West Germany coming together again after the fall of the Berlin Wall, and of course the change then, the sea change in European relations. We have to tell you that the Unter den Linden, the road leading up to the gate, is featuring both the German and UK flags, but also the EU flag, which is an interesting aspect because, of course, clearly this is an attempt to perhaps soften relations across Europe, bearing in mind that the first visit was due in Paris, That had to be postponed, but now, of course, into Berlin. And soft diplomacy is on show. These are the pictures of the royal entourage arriving. We can see the police outriders there. Cameron, our royal correspondent, is waiting there patiently with the others. And an indication, of course, Cameron, how important Germany sees this in terms of literally rolling out the red carpet in front of the Brandenburg Gate.
Oh, absolutely, Mark. It's a very excited atmosphere, I think, here at the Brandenburg Gate. There is a very large guard of honour who have assembled in front of the gate and the red carpet, which the King will walk and inspect that guard of honour. The President of Germany was just actually stood on the red carpet a moment ago to speak to the guard of honour ahead of Their Majesty's arrival. And as you said, Mark, it's the first ceremonial welcome at the Brandenburg Gate for any head of state in history. So I think that perhaps shows the significance of today's events. And of course, it's the first state visit of the new reign, the 29th official visit for Charles, but of course his first as king and his first foreign trip as king. There are a number of members of the public here, hundreds, if not at least 1,000. They're made up of members of the public in Berlin. Local schools have been invited, British embassy officials and their families, Royal British Legion as well. I can just hear the motorcade starting to arrive. I can't quite see from where I'm stood. Yes, I can. Yes, the car has just starting to pull up and the crowds are starting to cheer for the imminent arrival of King Charles III and the Queen Consort.
Yep, there's the
Royal
Bentley
Standard just in view now.
Yeah, we had that fantastic shot from the top of the Brandenburg Gate looking along the Unter den Linden, giving an indication of the crowds attending, as you were saying, substantial numbers there, Cameron.
There certainly is. It appears the King and Queen Consorts, the King's just stepped out of the car now, have a lot of fans, a lot of royal fans here in Germany. He is just there greeting the German president and Miss Budenbenger as well. They are then expected to make their way over to the red carpet where the Union flag will be raised in front of the Guard of Honour. Both national anthems are also expected to be played, and then the King will inspect the Guard of Honour. The first time, as I said, this ceremonial welcome has happened at the Brandenburg Gate. Usually it happens at the Presidential Palace, something such as this. But it's also the first time a British head of state has visited Germany for the last 8 years. It was 2015 where Queen Elizabeth II last visited Germany. So a pretty special moment. British and German officials feel that this is an opportunity perhaps to strengthen relationships between both Britain and Europe in this post-Brexit world, and a very significant moment for the King and the President of Germany.
Yeah, just to describe for our radio audience that Camilla is wearing quite a vibrant turquoise hat and coat with a sort of matching tie for the King, but overcoats very much order of the day, of course, Berlin being pretty chilly still at this time of year, and the linden trees on the Unter den Linden not in leaf as yet. But interesting that we've seen the EU flag flying as well there on the flag posts.
Yes, certainly, Mark. I mean, clearly Germany is still an EU country. You mentioned the Queen Consort's outfit. I have some details on that if you would like. It's a Bruce Oldfield's turquoise dress and coat, hat by Philip Tracy as well. And the Queen Consort is also wearing a special brooch. It was Queen Elizabeth II originally, and it was given to Queen Elizabeth by her grandmother in 1942 for her confirmation. So a bit of family history there for the Queen Consort, clearly as the new Queen of the United Kingdom. King and Queen Consort, along with the President of Germany, making their way towards the Guard of Honour and the red carpet now, ready for that Union flag to be raised, next to, of course, the European Union flag and the German flag, and we are expecting both national anthems to be played as well. We just saw the King give a wave to some of the crowds there. He is expected to personally go and greet them a little bit later on.
Yeah, I can see lots of young faces there, lots of school children, which is wonderful, of course, given the importance of this particular location, the Brandenburg Gate, on the occasion of unification of both East and West Germany coming together. But on the dais now, and I think the Guard of Honour taking up its salute.
The British government's diplomatic...
Absolutely. Their Majesties are expected to meet the local school children. You mentioned some of those local children in the crowd, Mark. The King there just waiting to expect the...
Oh, got it! Oh!
So the two national anthems played there by the Brandenburg Gate. Slightly better rendition than we saw the Euro qualifiers in Naples, perhaps some might reflect. But now, obviously, the Guard of Honour about to present arms. So that was the inspection there with the German Navy as well, the Kriegsmarine, and I think now getting nearer to the press photographers who are in the press pen there, getting this very historic moment, because this is the first ceremonial welcome in front of the Brandenburg Gate. This, of course, a state visit, and the cheers from the crowds. Will the King go to meet people? I think so. Cameron Walker, our royal correspondent, is there too, and Cameron, he was pretty quickly to the crowds, as we were expecting, to meet and greet people.
He certainly was. The formal ceremonial bits of this official welcome, strengthening relationships between two European countries. Buckingham Palace describing it as celebrating our shared histories, culture and values. But as you say, Mark, the King has gone straight to the crowds. He is greeting local school children here who are educated in Berlin. The Queen Consort is the other side of the square here. She is meeting just local members of the public. And we did expect, as you said, Mark, that the King and Queen Consorts would be greeting members of the crowd. We know that the King wants to be pretty personable, and we are seeing that play out here in Berlin. But of course we had the Guard of Honour, both national anthems of the two countries played. The President of Germany is still accompanying the King, and later on today, of course, we have a state banquet in the presidential palace where there's expected to be a toast, and both the King and the President of Germany are expected to give speeches. The King was very close to our position here, Mark, and he seems in incredibly good spirits. He seems pleased to be here, smiling at the Guard of Honour, and of course almost perhaps itching to go and see the crowds. It was perhaps quite a short official ceremonial part, and indeed he's spending a lot longer perhaps with ordinary members of the public.
And some tulips just been handed to the Queen Consort, and some very excited, vigorous handshaking going on too for the Queen Consort, as there is now for King Charles. This is obviously a very happy crowd to see this state visit. You were just talking about the banquet there with the President, Frank-Walter Steinmeier. Reports, I think, Cameron, that some of Charles's German cousins have been invited as well, perhaps including Prince Donatus of Hesse, who we're being told dined, of course, with Queen Elizabeth when she visited Frankfurt in 2015.
Yes, indeed, Mark. As we know, the King has German relatives, obviously dating all the way back to Queen Victoria, where she married German Prince Albert as well. And this state banquet, of course, is going to include some of those, perhaps, German cousins on the guest lists. Their Majesties are going to be guest of honour at this state banquet, hosted by the President and his wife at the Presidential Palace here in Berlin. As I said, there's going to be toasts. They're going to be greeted on the steps of the palace, we believe, and there's going to be the bands of the Federal Armed Forces playing there as well. And they are also going to be clearly, there's going to be drinks, speeches, and a lot of food. Of course, the state banquet in Paris and in France was cancelled. Yes. All the German parts of this state visit, clearly a lot of planning has gone into this, months and months worth of planning. And Buckingham Palace officials will be hoping that there are no more hurdles to overcome. So far, it appears the state visit has gone without a hitch. It seems to be a success. I can see the King greeting members of the crowd. Quite a lot of them, a group of them at least, are wearing cardboard cutout replicas of St Edward's crown, which of course in a month or two, 6 weeks actually, the King is going to be crowned with the real St Edward's crown in Westminster Abbey. But clearly the King and Queen Consorts are both have a global appeal. They are both famous on the world stage, so perhaps it's no surprise that ordinary members of the German public have come out here to greet them and to try and meet the King and Queen Consort.
Yeah, and some very happy faces, one has to say, in this crowd, all ages, from young to old, and conversing there with a very relaxed-looking King Charles. And you were reflecting in terms of the banquets. Of course, the fear in France was that official state banquet at Versailles, they said, may have looked like a Marie Antoinette moment. There's a very different picture emerging here in Berlin.
Oh, it certainly is. The reason that the French part of the state visit was postponed was after the French government requested that it was postponed, and that is because of the protests which we have seen across France due to the planned pension reform, some of which have clearly turned violent. So perhaps the optics of a state's banquet in the Palace of Versailles, as the French people were quite literally protesting on the streets, would not have gone down too well for President Emmanuel Macron. But no such protests here in Berlin and in Germany, which is why it was thought appropriate for this part of the state visit to go ahead. But I think this very much shows the global appeal of the British monarchy, and I'm sure, and perhaps British officials at least, will be hoping that this is the power of soft diplomacy which the royal family has very much in action, promoting British interests abroad and also strengthening relationships with our European nations in this post-Brexit world. Because, of course, another fact that the British government gave advice to Buckingham Palace in terms of where to have their first state visit was Europe rather than a Commonwealth nation. Many perhaps are questioning why it wasn't a Commonwealth nation like Australia or New Zealand or the Caribbean as well. And they are thinking perhaps from the British government's perspective, they wanted to shore up relations with with European neighbours, a show of unity perhaps, and maybe a Commonwealth tour will come later.
And it certainly seems to have worked the trick here at the Brandenburg Gate, just looking at the smiles on faces of, well, young and old, all generations here, of course, and gifts being handed across to the King, as well as, I think I've counted at least 3 bunches of tulips so far. It seems tulips in vogue in Berlin rather than daffodils, bearing in mind the changing season, of course, and lots of Union flags, Union Jack flags there. And as you say, I haven't seen the cutouts of the crown as yet, but obviously it's a nod to the coming coronation ceremony.
Well, I'm just going to ask my cameraman to see if he can get a shot of the cardboard cutouts of the crown. So you should be able to see them now, Mark, on your screen. If you're listening on radio, I suggest you have a look on our social media pages. But yes, they seem to be all identical.
Yeah, we've got them.
I think a group of people have decided to... oh, there we go, yes. A group of people have decided to come here, especially to show the King their crowns. As I said, it's 6 weeks until the King is crowned with the real St Edward's crown in Westminster Abbey. The Queen Consorts will be wearing Queen Mary's crown as well. It's the first time in a couple of hundred years that a crown is, let's say, being recycled for a coronation ceremony rather than a brand new one being made. But it is very significant having the ceremonial welcome here. The first time, of course, as I said, that any head of state has had the ceremonial welcome here at Brandenburg Gate rather than at the presidential palace. And tomorrow, the King will become the first British monarch to address the Bundestag, the German parliament. He has addressed them before, but when he was Prince of Wales. No other British monarch has addressed the parliament. So it's going to be very interesting to hear what he has to say, because clearly he can't be, let's say, as political as perhaps he could get away with as Prince of Wales. And his words are important because we are still so early on into his reign, and this is his first.
And, of course, environmental concerns still to the fore, and we reflect at the political importance of the Greens in terms of the makeup of the German government. So, as you say, that will be interesting to ascertain the reactions tomorrow. But well spotted with the crowns. We did get them there, recycled or not. And in terms of the flags, I think the Union Jacks outnumbering the German flags by the looks of it. I think we may have lost Cameron for the moment, but These are the scenes. Oh, yeah, you're back, Cameron. I'm just saying lots of Union Jack flags on, and I think we've got what looks like an RAF officer there in the crowd. Clearly, obviously, the visit will be looking at joint military cooperation with the issues concerning Ukraine, of course.
Yes, lots of little flags, Union flags as well as German flags, a couple of big Union flags as well. But yes, you're right, a big military presence here, and that's going to be perhaps a theme we're going to see over the next 3 days for this state visit. There are a number of engagements which reflect, let's say, the war that is ongoing in Ukraine. The King is expected to view a joint military exercise between Germany and between German military personnel and British military personnel tomorrow. They are also expected to meet the Ukrainian refugees who have settled here in Germany following the war breaking out back in 2022. And again, all of that in the context of the whole meaning of this trip, which is trying to strengthen relations between Germany and the United Kingdom, and also kind of celebrating our shared cultures and values. And of course, it's not the first time the King has had engagements to do with the war in Ukraine, but it is the first one he has undertaken abroad as monarch. He did visit a Ukrainian church in Ottawa last year when he went on the visit to Canada to celebrate the late Queen's Platinum Jubilee celebrations. But of course, he was Prince of Wales then. Now he's king, and the optics are just so much different when he is representing Britain as our head of state.
Yeah, indeed, a state visit, as we've been reflecting, as they head back to the royal limousine, the Bentley, as we've been reflecting, powered by a German engine. But that is the modern world, of course, and the rest of this very important visit continuing. So, Cameron, thank you for that. We'll keep you updated on the 3-day visit, of course, but let's get an update now on all the other headlines for you. Ray's waiting for us.
Thanks, Mark. It's 2:30. Here's the latest from the GB newsroom. The Immigration Minister has announced plans to stop housing asylum seekers in hotels and instead place them in disused military bases. Admitting that the use of hotels has, quote, harmed some towns, Robert Jenrick said migrants will now be placed in sites in Essex, Lincolnshire and East Sussex. The accommodation will be guarded by 24-hour security and meet migrants' essential living needs, nothing more, he says. As an incentive to local councils, the government will also provide a new funding package to accept refugees.
These hotels take valuable assets from communities and place pressures on local public services. Seaside towns have lost tourist trade, weddings have been cancelled, and local councils have had their resources diverted to manage them. And the hard-working British taxpayer has been left to foot the eye-watering £2.3 billion a year bill. Madam Deputy Speaker, we must not elevate the well-being of illegal migrants above those of the British people.
The jury in the trial of the murder of 9-year-old Olivia Pratt-Corbell has gone out to deliberate. 34-year-old Thomas Cashman has been accused of shooting the schoolgirl in her home in Liverpool last August. Her mother was also injured. He denies all the allegations. The General Secretary of Unison has told GB News if their members reject the government's latest pay offer, strikes will continue. Speaking exclusively to Gloria De Piero, Christina McAney said they're recommending that workers accept the deal and they should have a decision by the middle of April. And you can watch the full interview here on GB News on Sunday at 6 p.m.
We think there is enough here to go out and say to our people who are members of Unison, who, as you said, are the cleaners, the nurses, the paramedics, the occupational therapists, all the groups that we cover, that actually it will be their decision whether they accept it or not. So we're out for consultation just now. We'll have the result by the middle of April. If they accept it, that's the deal that's done. If they don't accept it, then we've paused our strikes, so we would restart them.
And mourners, including the Prime Minister and the leader of the Labour Party, have gathered to pay their last respects to Baroness Betty Boothroyd. The former Labour MP died last month aged 93. She was the first and only woman so far to be elected Speaker of the House of Commons. We're on TV, online, on DAB Plus Radio and on TuneIn too. This is GB News. Back now to Mark.
I joined GB News because I was sick and tired of not hearing my views being represented, not just mine, but so many people that I knew and spoke to.
I just couldn't get my voice out there. I couldn't say anything. I couldn't do anything. Whatever the narrative was, I kind of had to follow it.
GB News is there to provide a voice for those who have been ignored by the establishment media. We think different things, we've got a different style.
GB News is here to be optimistic and positive about the future.
It's real kind of dynamic and flowing, with the audience very much at the heart of it, like a big family.
Here at GB News, we talk about the things that matter to you.
Hearing the voices from right across our towns and cities, especially our towns.
All sides of the argument represented with a heavy dose of opinion.
We're on a mission here to make a difference.
And the GB News family really is here for you, and whatever time of day you can watch or listen.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
You're an inspiration to us all.
Clip that bit off.
Well, you are.
That's my ringtone. My political ambitions those days are gone, I can tell you.
She's only teasing. Go on.
He's probably going to want to lay down now. I'll give him 2 minutes to have one. Let's respectfully disagree. That's what we like on Jubes and Kerr.
Come and join us. GB News, The People's Channel.
Michelle Dewberry, weekday evenings at 6 o'clock.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
Welcome back to GB News Live. More from Berlin on that official state visit, of course, as it happens. But let's reflect now that Robert Jenrick, the immigration minister, has been speaking in the Commons earlier to outline plans to rehouse migrants. But it's coming amid a warning that the cost of supporting refugees or asylum seekers in the UK taking up a third of Britain's international aid budget. Now, the Independent Commission for Aid Impact says it's led to a significant loss in support available for overseas areas and disasters such as the floods in Pakistan or the drought in Somalia. We're joined now by Dr. Tamsin Barton, Chief Commissioner at the Watchdog. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. The figures are fairly startling in terms of this report. A total, I think, of £3.5 billion for 2022 alone.
Well, that's our estimate based on the figures that government gave us.
So it's come from official sources, then?
It has, although we have access to sources which are kind of the working numbers.
Right.
So there'll be an official statistic published next month.
And just to explain to people, I think the international aid rules allow that in the first year, the cost of supporting refugees is able to come from the development budget, effectively.
That's right, so long as they're humanitarian needs. So it shouldn't be used, for example, it shouldn't count as aid if it relates to detention or indeed to integration into the host community. It's for those immediate humanitarian needs for the first year.
Right, which obviously the government argues an asylum seeker is, and therefore the whole argument as to what happens once that claim is processed.
That's right. I mean, there are some countries where they sort of retrospectively, if it turns out that an asylum seeker isn't a refugee, then they'll actually take that off their aid budget. But in the UK, they do it all by modelling, and it's not done by following each individual.
Right. OK. Well, I mean, the question, therefore, is this good or bad in that they would, I guess, argue they are directly helping people, but as you've indicated, it takes money away from helping in Somalia, Pakistan or wherever, and the aid is needed abroad?
Well, ICA's job really is to ensure that any aid money spent is the best value for money, it's effective. And we consider that this is not the most efficient or equitable use of aid. Clearly, you can help so many more people if you respond directly to their needs on the spot, rather than if you have to look after them once they've arrived in the UK. and you may not be helping those most in need. We're only in this situation in the UK because of the limits on the aid budget. Right. So there was a limit reduced, actually, from 0.7% of gross national income to 0.5%. And so that's why the government is in this difficult position of trading off, if you like, between humanitarian disasters abroad and at home, because they've only got so much money.
Yeah, almost trying to triage, I guess, in that respect.
Well, it ends up that way because of the way they manage the target, the system. So what happens is, although it's the Home Office that is spending most of this money, some of it for Ukraine is actually the Department for Levelling Up. But it's not the Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Office.
OK.
And they have to pick up the tab, effectively, because the way the target is managed, it's the Foreign Office's responsibility to ensure the target's met.
Now, I don't know if you heard Yvette Cooper as Robert Jenrick was outlining these latest initiatives, and she was making the point that there are reports that the Home Office was competing with itself in trying to secure hotel rooms, pushing the price up. And I think your report has indicated that in terms of the number of hotel rooms, it's almost doubled in the past year. Is that right?
But in fact, the first point, I didn't actually hear Yvette Cooper, but she was quoting from our report.
Yeah.
We actually did come across these instances where clearly the price had been driven up, because you've got so many different schemes, you've got different bits of government, desperate to secure accommodation, and they were in a very difficult situation, particularly when you suddenly had large numbers coming from Afghanistan.
Yeah.
Now, I think the situation has stabilised, and so they've told them to coordinate between the schemes better.
But we were hearing just yesterday, of course, this initiative to get those Afghans out of the hotel rooms into housing.
Yeah.
But there is a housing shortage. So, I mean, what is your reaction to that?
Well, the first thing I'd say is that for the asylum cases, not for the Afghans, we saw when we looked at the contracts that they were not well managed to ensure value for money. So the key performance indicators hadn't changed. So the people in charge were not really looking and not incentivised to look for the best solutions.
They were just trying to get it sorted as quickly as possible, I guess.
They were under enormous pressure. We do understand that. But what we were told, including by officials within the government, was they felt under pressure to keep firefighting rather than find a long-term solution.
Yeah.
And we think that the fact that the aid budget means that effectively the Home Office doesn't have, if it's them, which mostly it is, don't have to find savings in their own budget as a consequence of spending a lot more than expected.
So in terms of probation, prison service and so on and so forth.
Not so much probation. I mean, it's just more how much extra cost there is from everyone being in hotels.
OK, I'm just going to break away. Bear in mind we've got this state visit going on, so we're just going to head back to Berlin because we have the King and Queen Consort now for the red carpet moment for the official photographs ahead of... I think probably maybe a sit-down and a cup of something ahead of the state banquet tonight. But we've certainly seen some substantial crowds there. And maybe a joke or a few words there that the President was... This is the Schloss Bellevue Castle, where I think the dinner will be held later. And we were hearing from Cameron, our royal correspondent, that it may well be that some of the King's cousins will be attending because of, obviously, the German relations and in terms of the royal family's German descent. And indications that so far it has been a very warm welcome on this first state visit and, of course, the first ceremonial welcome outside the Brandenburg Gate there in Berlin. And we've got our camera teams inside as well. Overcoat being taken off. Whether the Queen Consort will take off her very smart Bruce Oldfield coat. No, she's going to keep it, as one might expect, as a bit of a fashion statement. But heading now for, I think, perhaps an occasion within the castle where they will discuss matters. Soft diplomacy is what we've been describing it as, because obviously the King has no direct political role, but clearly the message in this state visit to Germany, whereas the one to Paris was postponed, is trying to rebuild the connection across Europe, given the difficulties with Moscow and the invasion of Ukraine. And we understand that the speech that the King may give in the Bundestag tomorrow may be both in English and German. We were getting indications, of course, in terms of the visit to Paris, that the King, who is a fluent French speaker, would have been giving that in French. But here we are, probably for a signing ceremony, I suggest. One hopes that the German pens work rather better than the pens the King has suffered at St James's Palace, if you remember that moment. And has he got his own pen in his pocket? I think he has. So he's leaving nothing to chance. One assumes that perhaps his courtiers have been checking that the ink's not going to leak this time. So the signing going ahead, the pen having worked, and the Queen Consort now signing as well. Interesting, of course, that we've got the European Union flags behind as well, which was the same on the Unter den Linden. And I think maybe the King is reflecting on that moment about the pen there with a few words with the President. But all done successfully. No inky hands. So another moment there in terms of the official visit in Berlin, and I think another photograph. It's going to be quite an album of the official occasions. So that's what's been happening in Berlin. Let's just have a very quick word finally with Dr. Barton, Tamsin Barton here. From what we heard about the RAF bases with Robert Jenrick and perhaps even barges, is this going to answer the problem in your view?
Well, we've been hearing for quite a long time about potential alternative accommodation. I think it is very challenging. Obviously, what's really needed is for people to be able to live in houses and flats and not the backlog, which there is at the moment.
Or essential living needs is how you described it, so, yeah.
Basic humanitarian needs need to be met. People need to be kept safe.
Thank you very much indeed for joining us here on GB News and bringing us your reaction to what we've heard today. Apologies for the interruption, but of course it is a state visit. Now, let's just also reflect on the sad news we've been bringing you about television presenter and comedian and animal rights activist as well, Paul O'Grady, who's died sadly at the age of 67. His partner saying, "It's with great sadness I inform you that Paul passed away unexpectedly but peacefully." Of course, during his career, the entertainer, originally known for his drag persona Lily Savage, as well as then going on to host the Paul O'Grady Show, Blind Date, Blankety Blank, for which he won numerous accolades, including a TV BAFTA, National Television Award, and also, of course, a radio presenter with BBC Radio 2 until recently, and a long-time advocate for animals, hosting ITV's multi-award-winning series For the Love of Dogs, acting as an ambassador too for the Battersea Dogs and Cats Home. Well, joining us now, Emma Pryor, a television critic, and Emma, one reflects that well-loved, but also winning plenty of accolades, official gongs.
Yes, I mean, he was awarded the MBE by Charles, King Charles now, back around sort of 2008 for his services to entertainment, and he was an absolute icon with a real heart of gold, who a lot of people had a connection with, whether that was because of the humour that he brought with him, with all of his acts, or whether it was because they were just drawn to him with all of his, animal programmes. He was someone I knew personally for around 15 years and absolutely one of the most fascinating and warm-hearted, well-known people I've ever interviewed.
And we saw that warm heart with the animals, but I gather he could be quite acerbic and quite cutting as well.
Yeah, I mean, he had very strong views about the NHS, but I don't think, I backed him on those views. He was very supportive of the NHS staff particularly during COVID. And that's because you've got to remember, before Lily Savage, he worked in social services himself.
Yeah.
He was a care worker back then. When he came from Birkenhead to London before he found fame, he came with £15 in his pocket and he was put up at a mate's house in Maida Vale, and he worked that gig circuit and became well known for his sort of gay rights campaigning, and people admired and respected him, not just as a campaigner but as an entertainer. I've got to say, one thing that Paul spoke to me about a lot in the last sort of decade was how he felt actually about, we talked quite openly about how he felt about sort of dying, which sounds like a weird thing to discuss, but when he, just 5 days before his 50th birthday, his 25-year partner, Brendan Murphy, died of cancer. He was only 49 and he'd only been diagnosed 8 weeks before. So Paul's 50th birthday was really sort of tainted with that absolute tragedy. And as he did towards 60, he was reflecting on that a lot with me. And, in 2015, he lost Jackie Collins and he also lost Cilla Black, two of his really fantastic friends. And then he lost Barbara Windsor in 2020. So he often said how heart-wrenching it was that he lost so many people that he adored. But he was also very lucky. He had a fantastic support network around him, and he always talked so fondly of Andre and his long-term agent Joan.
Yes.
He really was cherished by all who knew him.
And he had heart problems, which he acknowledged openly. But interesting that Malcolm, of course, Malcolm Prince, his producer, we fondly remember them together on Radio 2, saying just yesterday, laughing, smiling and full of life.
I mean, that was him through and through, actually. I interviewed him just after he had his second heart attack, which I think was around 2014. He actually made a joke. He said that he was on that many heart drugs that when he died, they'd have to childproof the lid of his coffin because to stop kids from getting near it because of all the drugs in his system. And he actually said that one day, rather absent-mindedly, he put his heart tablets, he mashed them up and put them in some cheese. And I said, Paul, why ever did you do that? And he said, because I'm so used to putting all the tablets for my pets when they're sick, for my dogs, into food, that I did it for myself. And I said, well, do you worry about your health? And he said, I don't think about what could happen next week or next month. He said, that's like thinking about a hangover when you're still at a party. So even talking about death, he always just came at everything with such a joie de vivre. He was wonderful.
Emma, thank you very much indeed for paying your tribute. Our condolences to you, but great to remember him with a laugh and a smile. Thank you very much. Let's take you to Scotland, because Humza Yousaf, who is the new First Minister, is about to announce his cabinet.
In due course. Of course I'm disappointed, because Kate's exceptional. She's a great talent. She's somebody who's got a lot to give. I would have much rather had her in government, not just government, actually have her in cabinet. But she told me that she didn't she wanted a bit of time out of the limelight, as she described it in her own words. I understand that, I respect that. And she's made a big decision that's for herself, that's for her family. But she will continue to serve this country, continue to serve this party with absolute distinction. Of that, I've got no doubt.
First Minister, what would you say to those who say young, or dynamic cabinet lack experience to meet the challenges ahead?
Well, I just don't agree with that assessment. First of all, we've got a good mix of both young, energetic talent. We've also got experienced, energetic talent in there as well. So cabinet secretaries like Michael Matheson, like Shona Robertson, my Deputy First Minister, of course, Shirley-Ann Somerville, who have been in the cabinet for many years. Some people returning back to cabinet like Angela Constance, and then some new faces stepping up to the plate as well. So a really good mix in there. But this is probably the biggest government reshuffle, and you'll see
So Humza Yousaf about to start work as First Minister at Bute House in Edinburgh, having been sworn in. And, of course, that question about Kate Forbes, who ran him a close second in terms of the vote, indicating, of course, after he'd offered her the rural affairs brief, and she declined that, saying that she wanted to get out of the spotlight after recently having a baby. But one wonders, it's a very odd assessment, given she decided to stand, of course, for First Minister. Anyway, we'll see what the political fallout is there in Edinburgh. Now, police are investigating the death of an 82-year-old woman after masked robbers allegedly burst into her home, knocking her to the ground. Joy Middleditch found in a serious condition at the home in Suffolk on Saturday, but then died in hospital on Monday morning. Let's get more with our national reporter, Paul Hawkins, who's at Pakefield in Suffolk. And Paul, I gather she was actually discovered by her family on the floor there in the corridor. I mean, awful circumstances.
Yeah, absolutely, Mark. She was found in a conscious but serious condition, taken to the James Paget Hospital. That's a 3-hour drive north of here. But as you say, a very sad news. She passed away in the early hours of Monday morning. The police then switching from a robbery investigation to a murder investigation now. And you can see a police officer behind me if I just step out of shot. Standing in front of the crime scene. We've seen forensic officers entering and leaving the property throughout the day, also specialist police search teams as well. Now, before Joy Middleditch passed away, she was able to tell officers that late on Friday night she heard a noise at the front door. She went to the front door and 2 masked men entered the property and knocked her over. She was then subsequently found on Saturday morning. Now, key to the investigation is a purse, a black and white checkered purse, because we're standing in Grayson Avenue. The purse was taken inside a handbag, and the handbag was found in Nelson Road. That's a 5-minute walk from here. So the handbag was recovered, but the purse was missing, and police want to find that black and white checkered purse. Now, reportedly, she is a great-grandmother and a mother who lived alone with her dog here in this property. Media reports also suggest her husband passed away in the last few years. Her niece reportedly describes her as quite a strong woman who would have stood up for herself. She wouldn't have taken any nonsense. Her niece's daughter has posted on Facebook, please contact Suffolk Police as soon as possible to bring these horrible scumbags to justice. And certainly the police looking for that person. They're also appealing for anyone with any CCTV in the area or any dashcam footage to come forward, particularly motorists who may have been driving between 6 p.m. on Friday and 7 a.m. on Saturday morning in the vicinity of the B1532 London Road South Lowestoft. They're appealing for them to get in touch. And they've also flooded the area with an increased police presence to try and reassure locals, because I've been speaking to Chief Inspector Sarsfield Donahue from Suffolk Police. He says that this is extremely rare for this part of Suffolk and indeed Suffolk as a whole, and so they're trying to reassure locals, and a manhunt is underway.
I gather that's like a retirement community there with those bungalows that we can see. So clearly a lot of other people there would be very worried indeed.
Yeah, absolutely. And indeed, the community's been coming together. Some local businesses have donated chains for front doors, also CCTV cameras to try and reassure the elderly in this part of the world, to try and reassure them that they are safe. And there is, as I say, an increased police presence. But yeah, police are appealing for any information, particularly CCTV or dashcam footage from 6 p.m. on Friday to 7 a.m. On Saturday morning. They really need that kind of footage to try and give them some leads in this investigation.
Yeah, and obviously we can see, as you say, plenty of activity there still at the scene. Paul, thank you very much indeed for updating us there at Suffolk. Back to you, of course, as we get more on that police operation. Public satisfaction with the NHS dropping to its lowest ever level, according to a major new survey. Just 29% saying they were satisfied with how it was being run, according to the British Social Attitudes Survey. Well, let's actually get more now with our reporter Jack Carson, who's been at Walsall Manor Hospital. And Jack, indicating that the public don't want a different model of healthcare, they just want the current model to work, the report says.
Yeah, this is really kind of interesting about this report, that there is such a dissatisfaction, according to this survey, of more than 3,000 people. Like you mentioned, 29% dissatisfied with the way that the NHS and the service that it gives them. That's the largest drop in a single year, going down to 29%. That's a fall of 7% in the last year. When you look at the level of satisfaction that there was in 2010, just over a decade ago, it was 71% there. So you can see the downwards trend that people are feeling. But as you mentioned, 9 in 10 people that we've seen from this report still believe that the NHS should be free at the point of use. But 8 in 10 people say that actually it should live within its budget more. And but of course we do know about the additional funding that the government is giving to the NHS. We had health leaders earlier in the week calling for Jeremy Hunt to, with these pay rises that the unions are of course voting on at the minute, when if those do pass, the health leaders are asking the government to put more money in, so the money for those pay rises doesn't come out of the current funding. But Matthew Taylor today, the chief executive of the NHS, saying that these survey results should be a red flag to the government.
Hopes, of course, that the nursing dispute settled, but the junior doctors still to take their industrial action as well. Jack, thank you very much indeed for updating us there in Walsall. We'll have to cut it short because with the visit, of course, of the King and Queen Consort to Berlin, it's been fairly tight for us. But more coming up with Patrick. Stay with GB News. We're back tomorrow, 12 till 3. See you then. Thanks for being with us.
You've probably seen politicians interviewed 1,000 times, but we do it differently. We find out who they really are, we don't shout, we chat, and hopefully we bring a bit of light, not just heat. Did you know,
All
Kate
sorts
Moss?
of Apparently.
Do you have a pair of jeans or a pair of jeans?
No, of course I don't. What would I do with them?
My friends are like, oh my God, what's she doing now?
Join me every Sunday at 6 for Gloria Meets, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, the Member of Parliament for North East Somerset and a former government minister. For years, I've walked the corridors of power in both Westminster and the City of London. I campaigned in the largest democratic vote in our island story.